it away. We should be good.
Hello, good afternoon or morning, and welcome to yet another marvelous episode of Lorebeards. And this time it's going to be particularly good because we are finally getting round to one of those factions that's not only neglected by us sometimes, but has been neglected by Games Workshop as well at various points. After all, the Beastmen didn't even get an 8th edition army list. We are, of course, today turning to those predators from the forest, the Beastmen, in particular, Malagor, the Dark Omen, who's going to be stomping free from the forest to hopefully reveal all of his secrets through the course of the next however long we take to finally get through it all. Now, I'm not saying that we are known, perhaps, for managing to talk at some length about these things, but today is going to be no different. I'm actually really looking forward to this one, and not just because we can finally get down with the good old Crowfather himself. It's because we've kind of skipped the Beastmen, as I think back in all the various things that we've done over the course of the last, wow, it's been quite a few months now. How long are we doing this now? We must be nearing...
Almost, I think we're about, I want to say we're at like 8 months?
Yeah, something like that.
Somewhere in that ballpark?
Right? Yeah. Right, before we go, though, I do have one other thing to say, because we have a particularly fun stream coming up. Well, depending on where you are, it's tomorrow or another day after that. We're going to be doing a big versus stream where good old Sotek and I are going to be having let's say a competition, as we both take one side or the other for one of the special characters that we have discussed in our previous streams. In particular, we're going to be going over good old Malekith stroke Malarian, and I am very much going to be fighting his side. Oh, yeah! And on the other side, we'll be having Cetra the Imperishable, who, by the way, will be perishing. And we're going to have a good old discussion about not just which one of these characters who will win. Not just that. We're also going to be discussing what it actually means when we say who will win, because the most common thing to do is say, well, he's got weapon skill 7 and he has got weapon skill 8.
No. Yeah,
we're nerd doing that. We're going to be having a big proper fight, and that also means discussing everything that they can bring to the table. And as we both know, both Cetra and Malekith have got entire empires behind them, so that's going to make part of the discussion as well. And I can't express how much I'm looking forward to that, because it's going to be proper crazy. And that will be starting in UK time, here we go, 12 a.m. on Tuesday. Now, I know that time may sound a little bit odd, and many of you who are on the UK side, like me, may go, what the bloody hell? You expect me to be up at midnight? And the answer is, yeah, come on, get your finger out.
we're punishing you. I don't know why, but we are.
So yeah, it's gonna be at midnight on Tuesday morning, or midnight after the Monday tomorrow. And that will be, I don't know, what time's that for you? That must be around about 6, 7, somewhere around there.
Yeah, it's 6 p.m.
6 p.m. There we go. 6 p.m. That you're on mid Atlanta. I don't know where time you're on. I always get confused with American times.
Easy.
Central. Right, there we go. That's super easy.
One.
The only one that matters. So that will be tomorrow stroke the day after, depending exactly where you are. And I'm really looking forward to getting into good old Malekith's boots.
Yeah,
and
indeed, granted, it's gonna be a little experimental, but there is gonna be like audience participation and a bunch of other things. We're really excited about it. I think we've cooked up something pretty cool. Y'all will like genuinely be able to change how the matchup will go. So if you want to, like,
Malekith's winning,
just represent so and all that stuff, make sure you
Malekith's winning.
Show. Yeah, sure he is. just like he won at becoming Phoenix King. Yeah.
Hey, dude, seriously, too soon. Anyway. Right, so I'm going to actually start on Malagor with something that has literally nothing to do with Malagor.
Sounds about right.
But it sounds about right, doesn't it? But it is related to what we've just been discussing, and it's sort of related in that the first thing I'm going to say about Malagor is not complimentary, and it's a simple one, and it's one that constantly bugs me about some of Games Workshop's naming practices, and that is, I don't know what to call my character. What will I call it? I know. I will take the trait of the character, a gore, and I will add bad.
Yeah, I was going to say, just Bad Beast is literally his name.
But I can't call him Bad Gore because that sounds really bad and a bit orky. So I know I'll go esoteric and call him Malagor, which just means bad in another language. Malagor. I mean, we've never done this before. Malekith looks across the oceans and goes, seriously? What about me? I'm just bad kith, bad brother, bad family, or alternately, Malarian. I'm just an Aryan, but with a bad in front. I'm bad an Aryan. Seriously. I mean, seriously, Games Workshop. There is a few Mala characters out there that really deserve slightly better names. And I thought I'd start off with a slightly negative point because there's going to be quite a lot of positive to say about good old Malagor, the Dark Omen, as we progress through this.
To be fair to Malagor, at least it's M-A-L-A Gore instead of M-A-L-E Gore.
He's not just really Malgor. I mean, that's a whole extra vowel. Good times.
I'm gonna knock out these little super chats we have real quick, and then I'm gonna hop in because there's actually some stuff that I am really excited to talk about with this character. Good. Before we really get off on it, any quick thoughts on the Shadow of changes? Yes, we're gonna be talking about that next week. That'll be over on Andy's channel. And so we're gonna be doing the new Shadows of Change stuff because there's gonna be a lot of stuff to cover there. I will say it's good. Yeah, that's my quick thoughts. It's good.
Yeah, I'm going to say one quick preview. I've had quite a few messages coming through with people expecting me to be disappointed because in this case, there's actual stuff that I've written that they've taken in a different direction, or I think it's fair to say, as they stressed repeatedly multiple times in their email, no, this was Games Workshop, it wasn't us. But regardless, certain things that I've written have been changed, and that's not something that bugs me or stresses me out or makes me go, why would they do that? Quite the opposite. It just makes me go, Warhammer's dynamic. It's a constantly evolving and changing setting. And I really quite like most of in fact, maybe even all of the changes. It looks super fun. So very much looking forward to diving into that next week. Of course, I will dive into it properly next week when we discuss the things that have changed, and I'll explain what has changed, what implications that has, because that's half the fun of it. But simultaneously, it not only doesn't bother me, it's not only something expected, I actually actively like it because it shows how Games Workshop is moving in different directions, and you can pick apart what that means if you desperately wish to do so.
Yeah, and I do agree very much with Andy. It's been kind of hilarious watching CA be like, "We have a gun to our heads, please don't blame us. It's not our fault." Poor bastards.
Yeah, that blog felt like heavy damage limitation. Oh no! Tap 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 tap.
What are Andy's thoughts on Thrones of Decay? We'll talk about all that kind of next week, kind of stuff. But Tarmacon, who doesn't like Tarmacon? Should be good. Would Super Saiyan Malagor be called Malabestagor? Sure, why not? That seems to be
it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
And then Tarmacon must rise the throne of chaos beckons. It does. Looking forward to that. Hopefully, sometime this spring. And then, why does GW have a fetish for giving out dumb names? Who knows?
It's for someone who role plays. Because one of we have discussed more than once, role-playing has been the thing that I've both worked on most, written most, and done most over the course of my many years of gaming. And for someone who role-plays, the names can sometimes be a complete mood killer. When you're saying something particularly spooky or something particularly awful, and then you suddenly bring up, and of course, this horrendous book is written by Necrodomo the Insane, and someone goes,
yeah, who?
I mean, seriously, that's the name. I mean, did you make this up, Andy? Because if you did, I am going to give you a serious, hard stare. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's just Necrodomo. And particularly interesting, I find it at least, is when you're introducing new people to Warhammer. People who have been playing it for a long time tend to just kind of ignore the names, get used to them. It stops being weird name McToot, that strange person over there that they don't quite get, and just turns into, oh, it's that character. And they forget that the names sound utterly ridiculous sometimes. And so when, say, Necrodomo pops up for the first time, the people who've known it for a long time literally don't even pause or consider it as anything special. But someone coming in for the first time goes, seriously, what the F is this? Is that a thing? And you're like, oh, yeah, you're right.
I guess it is, yeah.
That's stupid. Yeah. Okay, let's just not go to the Lizardmen and some of their original names.
I'm just sitting here thinking, like,
move on swiftly.
Tic-tac-toe and Croak and all those other guys.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Malagor is, as these names go, at least it's vaguely hidden. And Malagor is not that bad as names go. It's, however, deeply unimaginative. It's basically just bad gore.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you've got the other major antagonist of Morgor. Yeah, tried real hard. Anyway, so getting into the actual lore behind the name. So as Andy kind of mentioned about earlier, Malagor for me is a really, really, really fun character. One of the things that's kind of interesting about the Beastmen, generally speaking, when you're looking at Warhammer Fantasy, is often they're not given a lot of agency. They tend to be a race that sort of, they've always kind of been the redheaded stepchild of Warhammer Fantasy, where they didn't get as much attention as they frankly deserved. And there often were cases where they would just kind of there are often just cases where they don't really like seem to intentionally really do things. A lot of the times they just kind of show up. They're more like a force of nature that is just kind of in the area. Like they're sort of that primordial thing that resents change or that resents the advancement of civilization, and they buck against that. But other than that, they don't really like have a lot of schemes. They don't have a lot of overall goals, or they should, but they often are not given that kind of attention. Even when you're dealing with some of the really big bads like Morgor the Shadowgave, he's a little too insane to really have a overall plan. He's kind of more like a really, really, really scary, fucked up moth that's drawn to the flame that is godlike entities, as opposed to a actual thinking creature. And then you have like, others like Tarax, who's just kind of a minotaur that's just going to destroy everything that's in front of him. But then we get characters like Malagor. Malagor, when you're looking at the Beastmen race as a whole, he is the architect. He is the one big bad Beastman at the back of it all who is really trying to pull the strings and get the Beastmen as a race onto certain kinds of missions, or get that the flow that is their destructive war herds going in particular paths for particular missions that he's trying to accomplish. He has a goal, an end game, which is really interesting in that he doesn't get used a ton of the times, but what I'm going to get into in a little while is going to show how the few times he does get used is actually used very, very well. It makes me wish they had used him more. But I think the thing that's worth starting with him is just that Bray Shamans as a whole, which he is, the big bad Bray Shaman, essentially, that is their overall goal, is that as shamans of the dark gods, they try to take what the Beastmen are and give them a channel, give them a specific direction that they need to go in to crash against a particular enemy. Often because they're given visions from the dark gods or just some demons or other particular entities who will frankly try to use the Beastmen as a means to an end, which is also kind of the tragedy of the Beastmen. I almost wonder if that's worth touching on for a moment real quick about how one of the things a lot of people wonder about when they see the Beastmen, or like what really separates the Beastmen from like the Warriors of Chaos and stuff, is that the Beastmen very genuinely, tragically are a taken for granted force of chaos. They're called the Children of Chaos, which sounds like oh, that's a good title to have, because that almost implies like a system of care. But at least in the later lore, when you read down into it, the thing about the Beastmen is that the dark gods kind of already have their claws in them the moment they're just born. And it's not because and I think Andy is going to like where this is going because I'm going to want to hear what he's going to say about it in a second. A lot of people, I think, inaccurately assume that the Beastmen can only be horrible, evil creatures of chaos, but it's more of a situation that when Beastmen are born, because they have that very obvious corruption of the flesh, to survive, they don't have any other choice. Like, there is no other option. They are going to be forced out into the wilds because all other species are going to hate them and are going to kill them.
And boy, do they hate them in return. As the good old Beastman core rule, yeah, we hate you all. We are primordial dudes who despise everything that is civilization. Yeah, I generally agree there. The Beastmen are painted into a bad corner, and I think that's more than one bad corner. The first one of which is the Beastmen are automatically always assumed to be the Chaos bad guys, whereas a species which of thinking, learning, actually intellectually capable, let's call them people. It's an unfair painting, but that is what they are. And I'm not entirely keen on that as a general idea because it falls back into the same issue that D&D was having some problems with over the course of its last so many years when it had its evil species. And then somebody said, but couldn't one of them not be? And then those conversations turn into, uh-oh,
Yeah.
and I won't go into that. I'll just merely say there's a lot more here than is generally described. But I think the bigger issue is that the Beastmen are exceedingly poorly deployed in general, in that the only way they're generally used is to attack someone and to be killed by one of the heroes. And they pop up anywhere there's a forest. Oh, the Beastmen attack. The heroes have to take them. Oh, there's some casualties. The Beastmen are driven back. Oh, they're back into the forests again. And they're given not only very little agency, they're given very little character at all. They are just creatures that rampage out from the forest without any real thought of the fact that many of them have come from human stock. Many of them haven't. Many of them have come from different backgrounds. And if you go back even to their basic tales of men became beasts and beasts became men, and that was our first Beastmen coming around. These are not animals, but they are often treated as little more than animals, while simultaneously their background explains a pretty, admittedly brutal, but pretty complex society. And that society largely undermines how they're portrayed and used by Games Workshop. And that's one of the reasons why Malagor, for me, is an important character, because he's a character with an actual goal. He's someone who's trying to do something which is more than just come out of the forest, kick some guys in. Oh no, it's gone badly. We're getting beaten up by, I don't know, let's call it the knightly order of the day, the Knights Panther. let's return and dive back into the forest. Job done.
Who's kicking your ass today? Pull the slot.
Yeah. So, before I think there's somewhat of a reason for this, though, because if you take a look back at where the Beastmen came from, if we go all the way back in Games Workshop's history, they started off as pretty much, we've got some miniatures for other settings, for example, RuneQuest. We've got some miniatures for other settings like Michael Moorcock settings, which had Beastmen as well, or Brew if you're using RuneQuest. And they got ported over to Chaos because that's largely where Michael Moorcock put them. So the earliest editions, all the way back at 3rd edition Warhammer, where they're building the big army list, include your Beastmen in there. And then we hit the 4th edition where they basically turn it into the Warhammer we all know and love today. And Chaos included the Beastmen for historic reasons. But they weren't a unique species given their own stuff. They're pretty much just added on as a small extra. Yeah, you can have Beastmen and some Minotaurs, big Minotaur Lord, everything's cool. However, when it moved on to 4th edition, they added not a new Beastmen army list, but they added the Champions of Chaos. And the Champion of Chaos added a ton of characters. 2 Beastmen were included in there, neither of which were Malagor, so we don't need to worry about them too much, and we're about to see some of the issues as we move forward. We hit the 6th edition. And finally, we've got ourselves the Beasts of Chaos. And they separated Chaos into loosely 3 types, our demons, our beastmen, our warriors. And the beastmen had to be given a slew of extra background to be justified as their own thing. And they kind of did, but they didn't give them a lot of character. They basically went, they're bad guys, they're bad guys, they're bad guys in the forest. They like to kill and they're bad guys in the forest. They repeated the stuff that had been written back for the Realms of Chaos book for, we're talking 3rd edition Warhammer. They copied a lot of that, pasted it over, updated it, and said, oh, here's the monoliths that we had in the past. These are now the big herd stones, and they're moving around in big war herds, and here's our special characters. Yet again, no Malagor. Malagor hasn't arrived yet. The idea of adding any extra depth to their character hasn't really hit. It's not until we hit all the way into 7th edition that Malagor finally raises his horns. And we have ourselves a variety of extra special characters dropped in 7th that perhaps finally add a bit of actual character. And while some may say, oh, well, what about, and there are some special characters in the past who do have characters, they were very much representations of what the Beastmen were, not what the Beastmen could be in different iterations, as in different stories. Their history doesn't exist. The Beastman history is nothing more than, in the beginning, man became beast and beast became man. Chaos! And then they lived in the forest for a very, 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 very long time. And sometimes they come out of the forest and they kill people. Ooh, sometimes they're in the forest and they just rule in there and they kill people. That's their history. They don't have moments, say, 5,000 years ago, this Beastman did this, bound people together, threatened this area. Because of that, that had political ramifications in those other areas. Their history is given short shrift. And that's one of the reasons why their characters are somewhat basic. And they kind of are, which is why when 7th edition finally came along and Malagor was there, I remember reading it for the first time and going, oh, this is nice, a new character. I wonder what they'll do with him. The answer was sadly nowhere near as much as I would have liked, because when 8th edition came around, no Beastman army list at all. So no extra detail. It wasn't really until we hit the end times and maybe a White Dwarf article here or there that we see Malagor pretty much do anything of note. And it's a bit sad, I think, because the characters we'll describe is kind of cool.
Get one big moment in 8th edition, but it's in a different army book. Because he does
Which one?
feature. He features in the Wood Elf army book, as Mogruk the Crow Fiend, I think is what the Wood Elves call him. Which we will get into that particular story in a little bit.
We certainly will,
because it reinforces what kind of makes him a pivotal character. So with all that in mind, one of the things that I would like to kind of explore here on the stream a little bit, because when it comes to dealing with the Beastmen, is that I don't think Games Workshop, the writers, necessarily intended it by any means, because the Beastmen don't tend to be that level of depth explored. But when you're looking at like the 7th edition army book and some of the later writings that were edited either through the role play or just through little Black Library stories, there are a lot of really interesting hints that sometimes there are different kinds of Beastmen, or Beastmen focusing on things that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Like 7th edition mentions that there's a type of Beastman called Doe, which are female Beastmen that are not violent. They're actually known for being very shy, staying away from people, and generally just trying to kind of mind their own business. And granted, I wouldn't say it's all female Beastmen, even though the wording kind of suggests that, but it has a very interesting concept of being like, yeah, not all Beastmen are these horrible, bloodthirsty, monstrous things. You also have lore that talks about how Minotaurs often tend to be guardians, where Minotaurs will be used to like protect chaos shrines or like great piles of trophies and all these other things. And you have some tribes are more obsessed with protecting a particular blood ground or protecting particular herd stones. And some are full-on malanthropes, where they just hate humanity. And you have your individuals like Kazrak, the One-Eye, who are very motivated to deal with one particular group of humans. But then in the midst of all this, you have, of course, lore about the Bray Shamans trying to direct the Beastmen. Probably one of the best stories, and a character who we'll talk about at a later date, is the later lore about Gothor the Beast Lord, who was a character that, as he got rewritten, he ended up being a character who is kind of the anti what we'll talk about with Malagor, where he refused to do what the Dark Gods told him to do because he wanted to do his own shit. And that ends up getting him killed in the end. So what makes Malagor very, very fun is that Malagor represents a will, like an actual fun intellect, in that we have a character who his driving motivation, the thing that really gets him going and is unique about him, is that instead of hating civilization, instead of hating a particular group of humans, Malagor hates gods.
Yeah.
Which is really different. Like, it's a very high level thing to hate. Most beastmen are not going to be bothered about that. They're more bothered about reclaiming the blood grounds, which are like basically just everything, and returning the world to kind of the old days of savagery in the forest, and however good of a beast you were at hunting and surviving and killing, that is all that mattered, instead of having this civilization that taints the wilds, which is something that Age of Sigmar has done a better job of telling from kind of more interesting perspectives of how civilization isn't always a good thing, whereas Warhammer Fantasy kind of tended to treat it like it was always a good thing.
Yeah.
But what I love about Malagor is he is a character that is very, very specifically written to focus against that. He hates the gods of men. He hates all gods, but the gods of men in particular drive him to fury, where he goes incredibly far out of his way to always focus on destroying temples or sacred sites and defiling them. That's the really, really big thing about him that is also unique. He's not just there to destroy it. He uses his sorcery and also kind of cultural power. For instance, conducting great rituals or having mass sacrifices performed or doing all sorts of whatever he needs to do to effectively come to a sacred site, which if you watch the amazing Lawhammer roleplay series, you'll know that sacred sites have genuine energy to them. There's often like great amounts of hish or holiness that's drawn to those locations. Malagor knows how to stamp that out. Where like normally, like if you think about like a Bretonian Grail Chapel, for instance, or a building that's dedicated to Sigmar or Tal or whatever, they don't often necessarily require to be constantly tended to. If something important enough happens there, they'll hang on to some of that residual holy energy. But Malagor is drawn to these places. He finds them and he stamps them out with deliberate obsession.
And he doesn't do it nicely either. He's the sort of chap who's going to pop along and go, "Hey, priest of Sigmar, I love your temple. I'm now going to sacrifice you on your own altars. Hiya, Tal, look at your sacred trees. You're now hanging from them." And he doesn't just destroy, he desecrates and pulls apart and truly wounds. And you can, again, if you're looking at the general themes of the Beastmen, you can see where he's coming from. In that the general theme of the Beastmen is the idea of civilization on one side and let's say anarchy and chaos on the other, if we want to go for the small c chaos. And they represent something that is a bit more primitive, a little bit more bringing things down. And the gods generally, particularly the human gods, all of them are wrapped around with trappings of civilization. All of them in their own way are building the society of, in this case, humanity. And he goes directly to the core of that and unravels much of what has helped build the old world into what it is. After all, if you look back to its most ancient myths, almost all of them are about the gods sitting there at the beginning of time, providing them with access to elevated technologies, to knowing how things should work, to morality, and understanding how they should act as people. And even the most unlikely gods, ones that you might look at and say, well, what's this human god doing that's exactly to do with, say, civilization? They are all working within the fabric of society that humanity builds. And it is these connections that various temples build that Malagor in particular is tearing down. And through doing so, he's tearing out the heart of human civilization. And I think that that really speaks nicely to the overall character of the Beastmen, while simultaneously doesn't fall into the same trap of being the same as every other one, which is, I am a rampaging beast man. Look at me go as I chase after this thing I hate and kill it. This thing is a bit more developed. He has a reason behind what he's doing, and that he is actually doing something that is slightly higher in purpose, and it is also something that makes an enormous difference. And this is something that I think several of the other characters could have had perhaps a little bit more detail or at least personality added to them that sort of reflects this as well. I really quite dig Malagor and exactly where they place him. Particularly he's got some pretty cool special rules as well. I hate to play him, by the way.
We've got a lot of these super chats coming in, so let's get
Yeah,
caught up on these.
Start up with Cool right at the very top there.
You have Moloch Slugtongue, whose name after Moloch, the bull-headed fire god with the actual fire bull, is given the very original Tar plus Ox.
Tar Ox, 100% original, definitely not a terrible name. Hey, agree?
It rolls off the tongue well. I will give them credit for that, though it does sound like someone was in an office and went, "What about Tarx?" And someone went, "Yeah, that sounds great." Hello, this is Malagor. Here's my cousin, Malifigor. Here's my grandmother, Frightagor. And then there's my cousin twice removed, Malice Darkblade.
Yeah, you'll find if you look through all of Games Workshop's properties, there are several characters that start with the name Mal. And it is what it is. Let's pop over to the Singe Meister.
Who ranks higher on the Chaos pecking order, Beastmen or Fimir? Also, in part thanks to you two, I've fallen off the plastic crack wagon and I'm now building up some Kroot and Flesh Eater courts. Our condolences. But
Sods.
Yeah, I would say based on the writings we have about like the modern lore, the Beastmen tend to be treated better than the Fimir, as far as like the Dark Gods view. The Beastmen are a race that are active and are useful puppets, whereas the Fimir are often come off as truly discarded, where they no longer even get to play a role, and they are past the point of being, shall we say, they're past their heyday. They are a dying race in a lot of ways. Where most of the stories you'll read about them are you're finding their ruins or like their great fortresses where there are carvings about them and ancient legends, but they are not nearly as prevalent in the world as they used to be. The Beastmen are a growing force pretty much all the time. And while most of them are just fodder for the Dark Gods, sometimes there will be individuals like Malagor or Tarx who will ascend to being useful enough that the Dark Gods genuinely start to reward them.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all of that. I mean, it's fair. The Beastmen are both this bizarrely powerful force that could be extraordinary, yet somehow still oddly sidelined, not really brought up very much, and used as nothing more than the bad guy of the week. So it's quite clear these two Beastmen miles ahead. After all, we have a Beasts of Chaos army. We have a Demons of Chaos army. We have Yes, Warriors army. We do not have a Fim army with the Fim are popping out doing their thing. So that alone shows where favor lies, because as we all know, the Dark Gods themselves are now more a representation of Games Workshop's eye passing over everything, like an eye of Sauron from above. And it's fair to say that Games Workshop's eye has broadly moved on from the Fimmer, while it's still sitting there in the periphery of its vision. So yeah, definitely the Beastmen.
Hammond, I really wish GW hadn't made the Beastmen and Fimir to be fully dedicated to the four. I wonder what deities they would have followed. Thoughts? Well, that's definitely one of those things where like the battle game is going to be very, very different from if you're actually diving into the focus narrative. And it's actually like one of the things I like about Age of Sigmar is that in Age of Sigmar, they did remove the Beastmen from the four greater powers, which makes the Beastmen substantially more interesting. And actually does a better job of explaining why they're so separate from like the Slaves to Darkness, because the Beastmen are not Slaves to Darkness. Now in fantasy, that's not the case. They kind of still fall under that Slave to Darkness banner. But even then, it's better to have like, oh, there might be a spirit of the forest they worship who is, you know, a spiritual entity from the ether, but it's not necessarily one of the dark powers. Or they might worship a demon that has manifested among them, or maybe a beastman that has ascended to demon princehood, which really shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility, that they worship and whose will they try and enact. There should be countless, thousands of entities that they would consider worshiping, which, to their credit, the old world is brought back. The concept that there is like an almost infinite chaos pantheon. That the true chaos with the big C is just the 4 big ones.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they're going to do it, but they have a really good chance now to make the Beastmen substantially more interesting. Like I already like some of the new lore in the old world where it talks about like the Beastmen we have now are simply kind of the creatures from that craziness when chaos first came to the world that kind of survived those eras and have risen to the top. You know, they're the best of all of that insanity that happened that managed to survive and procreate and breed into a more stable species that has survived all this many years later. And hopefully they explore that well. I think they've done a marvelous job of it in Age of Sigmar, where like the Beastmen have a culture and they have their own like unique religions, their own unique myths and stories that they tell. Hopefully that will reflect into the old world as well.
Yes, to all of that. The Beastmen, as it currently stands, are led broadly by the battle game. And you tend to find that the species that are led by the battle game are the most constrained because the battle game doesn't require depth. What it requires is lots of cool adjectives that make you go, well, that thing fucking rocks. And it generally requires that sort of sense of good guys and bad guys. There's certainly a level of moral grayness. There's an uncertainty as to who really are the good guys and bad guys with many of the armies. But at heart, there's no uncertainty at all. We all know. And they tend to dial everything up to 11. Where if we move over to the things that have been led by, say, the role-playing game, they tend to not just have shades of grey, they have multicolored hues where they might express in many, many different ways. You'll find one community thinks one thing, the next community thinks the next thing, and the next community after that has, again, a completely different view. And the ones that were first created in the role-playing game tend to have a great well of depth that can be drawn upon to give you different ways of expressing them. But those that have come just solely from the battle game tend to be far more rigid, and Games Workshop, who are very keen to enforce their IP, and that, i.e., what they're trying to do is reinforce the stories that their army books tell, for example, they will say anything new that's coming along, I'm not entirely sure that fits what we already have. Where if it came from the role-playing world, all of that grayness is already there. And they go, yeah, I see where that came before. I can see why you're going in this new direction. Away you go. So you tend to find that the ones that were created with the battle game first are the ones that are most restricted and often come across the most simple. And Beastmen have very much fallen into that particular category, sadly.
Yeah.
For me, at least.
No, I would agree. Phil, I always felt that the Beastmen were in Games Workshop's most original creations. I haven't seen anything quite like them in most of the fictional settings I'm aware of, perhaps even unique than the Skaven. I will say that from an objective standpoint, no.
Yeah. Rather bluntly, Beastmen are just lifted from other settings. The Skaven are not. The Skaven are one of the few incredibly unique things from Games Workshop's broad catalogue of factions, species, races, et al. The Beastmen, by comparison, are pretty much a lift from RuneQuest, the Brew. And if we go over to, say, Michael Moorcock and his Beastmen and Chaos, in fact, all of Chaos is lifted from Michael Moorcock's book. Even the 8-pointed star of Chaos, the Chaos gods, the different hierarchies of princes and such like sitting inside Chaos, all comes from Michael Moorcock, including the concept of mutation, Beastmen, and the idea of humans becoming beasts and beasts becoming humans is basically what happens to the Chaos forces as they go out and they start off all as one species and they become something different as the change is wrought upon them. So the Beastmen, sadly, very much not unique, but they have moved into a slightly different position because by comparison to their sources, they've gained their own culture. I'd say the Brew over in RuneQuest have a far deeper culture because they've been given more space, and I'd argue that the Michael Moorcock ones are far more chaotic because they go all over the place with mutations, unlike the far more stable Beastmen. So they've got their own niche that they've created, but ultimately Skaven are almost certainly a much more unique species.
But thank you for the super chat, and I do love the Beastmen a lot, and they have become very cool things. And if you read the Black Library books, especially, you get a lot of that Michael Moorcockness, where like they don't tend to look just goat-headed; they're usually like a complete mess of things, which is fun and cool, and also super spooky. Like hell, go check out like the first Gotrek and Felix story ever written. Has some pretty wonky Beastmen in it. Hammond. A follow-up. Also, how different do you think their culture would have been? Do you two think it would have been much different? Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Loosely speaking, there is a very obvious tie to a god such as, say, Tal, the great horned god. Not only does that make sense as a point of worship, it makes sense spiritually in the Warhammer world as well, because there is a great god of the forest that is associated with wild beasts, and it has great horns. It is almost pregnant with possibility. It almost feels like it should happen. Like there should be some stories of some beastmen that have effectively defected and now worship Tal, who they don't perceive as a human god at all. They perceive as a god, a great spirit of the forest that very much manifests through them. They are better representations of Tal than any human is. And I think there's definitely something that could have been teased out. After all, it has been thousands of years. It's not just a couple of years that the Beastmen have been kicking around, say, fumbling about in the darkness, reaching out to Chaos because no one else will listen. The other gods will listen because the other gods, I mean, it's material stuff. They don't really care that much. So I do feel that there's something there.
Yeah, I would say that would be very true of like the Beastmen of the different continents as well. Like I could definitely see the Beastmen of Nagaroth developing a strong affinity for Anathrema, the Savage Huntress, who's one of the Elven gods, where I could see them kind of like how they've always sort of had the lore of like Cain, the Bloody-Handed, is worshipped by some humans in the old world, even though their understanding of it is not the true Elven understanding, but they still worship Cain. I could see the same thing being done for like Anathrema over in Nagaroth by the Beastmen, which would make a really interesting story, especially dealing with how would an Elven god react to that? You know, would they be like, oh, these are truly the most savage of hunters, therefore you got the big thumbs up, or would it be, oh, gross, they're not elves? In which case, it's still an interesting story. But yeah, could a Beastman ever become Everchosen? Technically, yes. They could. There is some later lore that kind of ran with the idea of like, oh, the Beastmen, their souls are already forfeit the moment they're born because they're just too chaosy, which they try to use to be like, oh, that's why you don't see any demon princes in their army roster and stuff like that, because they don't have anything to bargain with. They don't have anything to offer the gods. But they kind of like do a 180 on themselves, because then you get characters like Taurix, which Taurix is as close to a demon prince as you can get. And Khorne literally sent a herald to him and was like, boom, here, have a bunch of gifts of corn, and made him almost invincible. So yeah.
So I'd say yes, although as prophecy goes, you generally have that sense throughout all of Warhammer's history that humanity is almost destined to rise up and end the world. So there's a hint of that through particularly the way they represent the Everchosens, where it's almost always a human who has become important for one reason or another and is coming down to destroy everyone. But loosely, I see not only no reason for not doing that, I think it would create our cycles of Everchosen paths to be much more interesting if we didn't just rely upon the old, oh, it's another warrior of chaos, here he comes, and here's another warrior of chaos, here he comes, and here's another warrior of chaos, here he comes. It's a bit dull, and the Warhammer world has so much more to offer.
Yeah, make it a lot more dynamic. Also play on the words of Taurus and Oryx for for
similar place. Yeah, good point.
Would a mutant who recently turned and was skilled in black powder still use them even if they joined a war herd, especially how useful they could be for raids? Okay, that's actually a super interesting question.
It is,
because it kind of ties into something that comes up with the likes of Malagor, of that the Beastmen are not just what are often referred to as like true Beastmen or true Gores in some writings, but they're made up of mutants and the offcast of human society or other societies, which one of the things I love about the Beastmen that is only ever shown in like really a negative light, but could have some fascinating stories from their perspective, is that the Beastmen accept everyone. There's a whole thing that's talked about a lot in the lore of that if a baby is born a mutant and has any kind of noticeable mutation, basically what will happen is that a lot of the time the parents know they cannot keep the child because they don't have a way to hide the mutation effectively, which means that them and the baby are probably going to get burned at the stake. So instead, yeah, woo, we're the Empire is so nice. What a wonderful place to live. So instead, they take their babies out to the forest and they just leave them because either they are like, you know what, we'll just let nature take its course and we don't have to do the deed ourselves, so it's less traumatic. But there are many people who are kind of secretly hoping that someone else will come and get them and take care of them, and the Beastmen do. Yep. If they hear the cries of babies in the forest, you would think, based on how they're described, as like, oh, they're these horrible, bloodthirsty monsters that just kill everything and destroy man. You would think they'd see a defenseless baby and go, oh, free meat. But they don't.
They don't.
They take them in and raise them among the herds.
And it's such a point of culture and society that they tend to forget. I mean, the army list very much focuses on pretty much true beastmen. That's it. They don't really spend any time elsewhere. But you find again and again, both in licenses and occasionally short stories and elsewhere, the alternative pops up. I remember having a discussion with the folks over at Fat Shark about one of the videos they were making for the
they made that amazing Beastman video.
Yeah,
the Magic DLC.
Yeah, the Winds of Magic DLC. That's exactly what I was going on to. And cut a long story short, child comes back, kills everybody. He's now a Beastman because he got left out in the forest. I won't spoil it. Go check the trailer out. Kind of did spoil it. And it's lovely. And that's a core part of what the Beastmen are. And it's often forgotten by the Beastmen army list completely, where they very much characterize the Beastmen as just the children of chaos who are the descendants of those who mutated ages ago. They live in the forest. They kill shit and stuff. Yeah, that's them. That's it. We're done. And all the potential for mutation, the potential for their populations integrating with, and oddly, properly integrating with the human populations that they live beside. There is a society there, and there's give and take. And the army list projects them as only pretty much give, and that give is an axe. Where in truth, there's children going one way, there's herds moving through and picking these children up. There is certainly levels of community going on that is weird, and some of those human populations are going to have direct connections with the passing herds, some of which will almost certainly want the herds to pass, so they'll provide not just children, but offerings. There's a lot of society going on with the Beastmen that is just bluntly ignored. And that is, I fear, one of the biggest mistakes with the Beastmen. And that's that they have presented them as walking, talking, black and white bad guys, while simultaneously trying to tell us that, no, they also do this and this and this and this, all of which speak to a bigger, deeper culture without ever examining it, not even in a lovely little side box in their army lists. It's pretty much mostly forgotten.
Yeah, honestly, the Black Library books do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to trying to make the Beastmen more dynamic, more interesting. Like a good example, if you ever read the Knights of Bretonnia series by Anthony Reynolds, the first book features a Beastman character as the main antagonist, and it's sad. Like, it's not like oh, look how evil and horrible this thing is. No, it's really depressing because it kind of shows that, like, if humans were not as like about mutation, that there could be a relationship between humanity and the Beastmen, which honestly should probably exist in some little small out parts of the world. Like Andy said earlier, the idea that a Tallite Beastman would make some kind of synergy with a nearby groups of humans, which would then be something they would have to keep secret from the outer world, would make for an awesome story and would make a lot of sense within the Warhammer Fantasy universe.
Absolutely. And we all know what would happen to those. They'd be burnt. It's great. Where the next steps towards civilization and development, bringing the Beastmen in rather than excluding them, would almost certainly help resolve things like the incoming end of the world. But no, they don't do that. They exclude them, they other them. And it also, just to go on a slightly different tangent, brings to the fore the core story of what the enemy within was going to be when we were popping over with the mutant edict. If you don't know what that means, it means that Karl Franz at one point in his long reign says, you know what, mutants are legal. And there's a big long discussion about that inside that adventure. But that adventure really doesn't but it really doesn't dive into the complexities of it, because the actual story behind it is bizarrely and unexpectedly positive. And most people immediately, their gut reaction is, well, this is wrong. We must burn the mutants instead. So there's a lot there. And still loading says more gunk or whatever such. Still better than Malagor. You know what? That's not too wrong. Hey, Laughing God, at work. So I'll have to watch this later. That's a shame, Laughing God. While you're watching it later, hi, later. You guys rock. Oh,
yeah,
love the Beastmen. Me too. Would there be any Beastmen that come to the realization that Chaos doesn't care about them and reject Chaos? I think the answer is absolutely yes. But then where else can they go? Because not only does Chaos, because Chaos also accepts them. For all that acceptance is pretty horrible, it does accept them, where the societies that they live amongst and between does not accept them at all. So the Beastmen are in a pretty poor place, the poor sods.
Yeah, and there are actually some Black Library focused stories that do explore that concept, where you will have Beastmen characters who kind of don't particularly care very much for the Dark Gods, or that will often be a conflict within their herd. Is you'll maybe have like a Beast Lord who only cares about himself because he's like, fuck the gods, they don't care about us anyway. And then you may have a Brace Shaman who's like, no, this is the path we need to stay on because it's our destiny, or there will be punishment if we don't.
Hey, Giles Barnes, let's read this one out completely because I not only agree with it, I completely agree with it. Hi, Andy and Sotek. Hi. Long-time listener, first-time texter. Delighted to see you first time in. You rock. Welcome to the show. The fact that the Beastmen take rejected babies who are mutated and genuinely seem to raise and take care of them always suggests to me an underlying human compassion to the species. Now, I'm going to take that word human out because human's not necessary. We all know that all species in Warhammer mostly are capable of compassion. It's not just human compassion. It's not like humans are paragons of compassion. Let's be honest. They are not. But the idea that Beastmen have compassion that expresses in one way or another is not just the case. It's actually definitely the case because we have multiple stories of them doing it. Now, does that mean that the various Beastmen that they end up raising, or mutants or whatever they may end up be, the Ungor or the Gore that they end up being come the end, are what we would class as good guys who have been on the receiving end of a lot of compassion? No, not necessarily. It depends entirely on the nature of the war herd at hand. And as we have from various sources, most of the war herds aren't exactly friendly. But that does not mean that underlying it all, they are at least half human, if you want to view it in such blunt ways, and that comes with at least half of standard humanity's compassion. But compassion is not solely held in the hands of humanity alone. What the biggest issue is to tackle here is their society and the gods they worship and how that expresses, and how these gods have built their own version of civilization, which is very much about bringing down everyone else's civilization, no matter how it may express. And that's what they are brought up with. So they tend to turn into rampaging monsters. I don't think, however, that is inevitable.
Yeah, I agree with everything he said.
Yay!
Ryan Woodall, is there any possibility for a Beastman to resist the call of chaos and attempt to build their own civilization? I apologize if this sounds blasphemous. Is there any possibility? Yes. Beastmen building civilization, which is something we'll get back when we're all caught up on these, we'll kind of swing back around to with talking about Malagor a bit. The thing about the Beastmen that makes Beastmen tend to be Beastmen is it is a race that they live very much strongly by a survival of the fittest mentality, and the sense that they seem to embrace that feral aspect, that savage aspect of nature that isn't necessarily evil, but it is about survival, being strong on your own, not coddling weakness, not trying to build up walls to keep out nature, but to live and thrive among it. They very much look at civilization as something that is attacking their way of life, that it's destroying and burning the forests. It's domesticating the wild beasts that they follow and rely upon for their armies and for food. It's destroying the forests that burn away the forest paths that they walk. It's tearing down their altars and shattering the stones where they offer up their own worship and they have their own rituals and ceremonies. They see civilization as quite literally a direct assault on their culture, on their way of life, where it's these outsiders who are new, like they're not what's the word I'm looking for? They're not like people coming from Europe over to North America, but they are people who have come up and are moving into the Beastmen space and attacking them and going, oh, well, those guys are horrible, ugly looking monsters. And we also don't like the way their culture looks. So we're just going to wipe them out and take all their shit. Like from the Beastmen perspective, quite literally, they are defending themselves most of the time. Because their territory is being encroached on, and they get pissed when that happens and they fight back. And that, which is one of those things where when you really start to look at it, you go, there's some interesting things going on with the storytelling that is cool and I like, but
Yeah, agreed completely. I also want to call out something that I often get a little bit of a bugbear about, and that's species and race. Because the words have definite meanings. Different species can't interbreed. Beastmen are a different race of humanity. Humanity a different race of beastmen if you must. In that they can interbreed. And this is somewhere where the word race absolutely does have connotations. They are not separate species. These are entirely potentially integrated as populations. And that in and of itself is a super fascinating angle to take, given that we all know what people are like. And I don't want to be too blunt about this, but if someone can shag it, they will. That's pretty much what people do, and Beastmen do the same thing. So there is going to be all manner of stories of integrations that you just normally wouldn't expect, because people are people, and ultimately we're driven by pretty basic needs. We got to eat, we got to sleep, we got to drink, we got to have sex, and we got to procreate, and they definitely would be mixing. So this whole, would Beastmen be able to resist the call of chaos? It depends how you define Beastmen, because so many of them were human. Are they human? Of course, that means that they could resist the call of chaos. There is such an integration between the two populations, particularly in the forest populations, that the answer to this question can only be yes. Only be yes. That nothing else would make sense outside of that. Are we there now?
I believe so. Or could a set of beastmen that demand to be acknowledged by the gods instead of being taken for granted, killing a bunch of chaos chambers proves they are serious business? Oh, that happens a lot.
Yeah, that's gonna happen a lot.
Yeah, one of the good things about the beastmen is that they are quite literally described as jealous. They hate the warriors of chaos, because to them these are human upstarts who are getting lavished upon by the dark gods, because the dark gods are trying to entice them over. They're trying to say, look at all these cool things I'll give you in exchange for your worship or your soul or whatever. And the beastmen don't get that. They're just expected to do that. And they hate that dynamic. They realize it's unfair. So beastmen will very, very, very often aggressively attack the warriors of chaos and try to kill them and rip them apart, to show that, no, they're dominant. They're the true children of chaos. You humans are just asshole, like impersonators, but you're not the real servants. We are.
And you've always got to worry. You've always got to wonder just how much of that's actually true anyway, given that right from the very first time that the whole path to glory, the starting off as a mortal and moving yourself towards demon princedom was initiated, literally anything could follow that path. And every single time you get yourself some new Beastman expansion or whatever, it's often sitting around the top somewhere, the path to glory that they're all following. So are the Beastmen really any different in reality, or is it just there's so much prejudice running around between the different types of chaos factions? There could be lots of answers here, so I wouldn't try to dig a hole and then jump in it and say it's only this hole, no other hole works. There's almost certainly going to be a lot of variety out there in terms of how it actually manifests in practice.
Yeah, and there are some beastmen that see the warriors of chaos and go, oh, these guys are clearly favored, we should work with them, or oh, they hate the same guys we hate, let's work with them. But there are a pretty hilarious amount of beastmen that go out of their way to attack warriors of chaos.
Hey, Chipmo, I am sad for you.
Oh,
love you guys.
Chipmo, hope you'll get better soon, my dude.
Yeah, our house has been cursed with the corruption of COVID. Damn you, Nurgle. Get away from Chipmo. We are not impressed. Hey, Hammond.
How would Malagor go about communicating with a human if he realistically wanted to have a philosophical, theological discussion about man's gods? So, great question. The answer is he would and does. Malagor is Malagor is full on the villain that comes in, and there's like a city with a a building dedicated to Sigmar, whether your church or your temple or whatever, and he shows up with his war herd, or if it's isolated just by himself or whatever. He takes his time, because doing a ritual to befoul or to despoil a sacred site, that takes a very specific set of things you need to do, and it requires a lot of magic and preparation. And Malagor knows what he's about. Malagor is old. One of the things that's really interesting about him is it talks about in his lore when he's first introduced that there are ancient wood carvings from like the dawn of human civilization in the old world depicting Malagor.
Yeah, I find that one super interesting. I think we're going to have to dive into that one as we go along, because there's multiple ways it can be interpreted. And no matter which way you interpret it, it's pretty huge in terms of either his age or his importance.
Yeah, but Malagor, using magic is one of the best ways to communicate across language barriers, especially when you're dealing with Beastmen, because Beast Tongue is actually pretty hilariously described, because it's essentially Dark Tongue, but because the Beastmen can't make certain words, because their mouths are very different from humans, because they have like wolf fangs and kind of a goat's shaped mouth, so they can't use a lot of the like particular sounds that regular humans do. So they've developed their own form of Dark Tongue, which is known as the Beast Tongue. And but there are characters that exist who are able to cross that barrier, and they're almost always Bray shamans, because they use magic to do it. Or you have a character like the Harbinger who's literally made concoctions that he can drink that changes his mouth so that he can speak the human tongue, which is as awesome and horrific as it sounds.
Yeah, and I'd say particularly to answer this question here, would he go about communicating with others? One of his raison d'etres is to bring the absolute downfall of human gods and their representatives, often by murdering them on their own altars. But simply murdering them isn't enough, because he has to completely destroy them. And to destroy something is to change it, to change its beliefs, to actually tackle what this individual priest believes and show it to be a falsehood, to show it to be something that was a waste of that priest's life. And it's upon that dawning realization, it's upon that priest or priestess or whomever it may be, realizing just how much they've wasted their life, we've reached a culmination point where sacrificing that individual to the ruinous powers, time has come.
Yeah, and we will swing back around to this as soon as we get through these super chats, because there's something really cool I want to talk about, but I want to get through these real fast.
Indeed.
Mandatis, thank you so much.
As Mandatis, always, you rock.
Fucking generous tips. We always really appreciate it. Playing Total War gave me appreciation and love for the Beastmen as it did Bretonia. I'm looking forward to including a small force of them, mostly Minotaurs, alongside my Cornate Tillians.
Nice.
And Morgar, and I'm eager to learn of Malagor. Yep, so we'll keep going on that. Thank you again so very, very much. We really appreciate it.
Super appreciated. We're now down to Doom Rider.
Would it be fair to say that Malagor was a sort of backup plan to weaken the other gods with how he desecrate and wounds belief? So we'll kind of get into like Malagor's prehistory, which we're about to touch on, as far as like what may have been his intended purpose versus what he's actually doing. That is a great question, though, and a good theory that he could very well be an intended, shall we say, wrench thrown into the gears of humanity to deliberately screw with their pantheon and to weaken their hold over the old world. Because the Chaos Gods do not like the other pantheons for very good reason, especially if you go watch the Lawhammer series and hear more about the pre-war before the gates were closed. Phil, one of my favorite parts about the Beastmen is they're one of the few, if not the only, Warhammer factions that are played completely straight. There's no humor, mirth, and hammy quotes in the Beastmen army book. They're just real. That's a it's an interesting thing where seventh edition, I would say seventh edition was really seventh edition took itself very seriously.
Yeah, it really
did. The best way to say it. Like 8th edition kind of introduced some of the humor back into it, but 7th edition cut a lot out. It created a ton of new characters, and they delved deep into a lot of storytelling. But yeah, they kind of cut out a lot of the haha, which wasn't always a good thing. Because there is personality to be found there, and you don't want to take things too seriously.
So I have a relatively strong opinion on this while simultaneously sort of agreeing, which is not uncommon for me. In that, grim and dark isn't grim and dark if it has nothing to be pitched against. You need to be able to have the high points to understand how low the low points are effectively. So if you have a book that is entirely bleak, none of the book feels all that bleak. It's just, yep, it's a book. A whole bunch of things are happening. But if there's something that tries to provide some contrast and context to what that book is offering, suddenly seeing that makes you go, well, holy shit, this is bad, because this is what it was before. And I think that to a degree, there is a certain amount of that in the Beastmen army list. If you take the very first one, Beast of Chaos, it pretty much opens with I can't remember the exact quotation. It's something like, and man became beast and beast became man. And you got that double page spread of all of the mutants forming.
Really
one of the
art.
Yeah, one of the spines coming right out of his back. And then that piece of art was duplicated in the 7th edition as well, where it was dropped down to just a half-page image. And that provides you at least with some idea of what came before, how they were consistent. They became something quite different. So we got some contrast there, but the lack of humor at all means that it's very po-faced. And that humor doesn't mean silly names. That humor can be presented in lots of different ways. And it can sometimes be a particular character not succeeding at a task. It can be an event that meant that the Beastmen succeeded because of somebody else's failure because they were foolish or stupid. There's lots of ways humor can be injected into a text without removing the tone, and indeed helping to contrast the overall tone to ensure that tone's nailed home. So I'd say the no humor and mirth for me is a bit of a shame. The lack of hammy quotations, I'm okay with that in general because they all have their places, and I don't think the place is here because the Beastmen are pretty much as you describe. So thank you very much for the comment. I both agree and also feel that a greater and tighter editing on it might have given you a book that, if anything, felt darker and grimmer because it had those slightly lighter moments.
CEO Necromancy, thank you so much. Hey, dudes, can't stay long, but does Malagor acknowledge Morgor as a god? So the hardcore answer is we don't know because we never see them in the same room together. Yeah. However, I would argue that Morgor is very clearly described as Beastmen identify him as a sort of divine figure. He is seen as a god. And I think Malagor would A, be keenly aware of him, and B, would probably agree. But you have to remember that Malagor has a purpose. There is a mission that Malagor is trying to fulfill, and that is the thing that matters the most to him. And I think very strongly that he would find Morgor to be very frustrating because Morgor doesn't do plans. Morgor is like the most chaotic entity. He is mutation manifest, and he is completely batshit crazy. Not in like the, oh, he's insane sense, but in the sense that you're taking an entity that lives in like 5-dimensional reality and you're forcing it into a 3rd-dimensional reality, and it is struggling. Malagor cannot direct Morgor. He cannot control Morgor. He cannot influence Morgor. So does he see him as God? Oh, probably, yeah. But he probably also realizes that Morgor is a problem to him, not something to be actively worshipped and worked with. Chris, shout out to the Gave Child and Knight Errant. Yes. And to the Old World Bestiary for giving Beastmen an actual voice in our own world section, in our own words section.
Yeah, I do love the Old World Bestiary for adding that. Thanks to TS Lukert. Hey, TS, you rock if you're out there. I'm absolutely agreed. And good call for that one, Chris. And thanks very much for the super chat. Hey, CB4N.
If the Beastmen found a baby mutant with a beak, I have to kick them out. Sorry, Kate's Workshop said no beaks.
No beaks. Yeah, their desperate attempt to try and keep the Age of Sigmar discreet from Warhammer, I think, sometimes has casualties. And this is an example of a potential casualty.
Yeah. Would a tall worshipping Beastman make Kruber and Carillion a furry? No, I think they just try to kill. Well, so one of the interesting things is I think sometimes when we bring that up, people go, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Like the cult of Tall would never tolerate that. You're right. They wouldn't tolerate it. But that's just like how the cult of Ulrich does not tolerate children of Ulrich. The actual ones that can transform into wolves and stuff. The Cult of Ulrich really fucking doesn't like those guys, even though they are very clearly blessed by the god. And that would be a very similar situation to the Tallites. If they discovered there were beastmen blessed by their god, they would do everything in their power to keep that on the down low and kill those things as fast as they could, because that would make them look bad politically.
Yep.
Why is Malarian called the Witch King? Because he weighs the same as a duck. He's sure.
Hey, Seth, moving on swiftly.
Are Tigermen a kind of beastmen? We don't know.
Ooh, that's a question, isn't it?
A great question. We don't know. It seems very likely that we're going to be seeing Tigermen in the near future, thanks to the Total War information. So very excited to see. I'm curious how Games Workshop's going to handle that, because the lore agrees with itself on whether or not they're beastmen. Schwarzaj, no joke, you're talking to beastmen is giving me a ton of ideas for my D&D campaign. Gonna love making complex quests with them now. Awesome. Have fun with that.
I generally cannot stress this enough if you're out there on the role-playing side. Adding morally complex situations makes an otherwise dull dungeon bash suddenly interesting and actually horrific, as the bad guys are sitting there being bad guys and the good guys come in going, we're good guys, and they suddenly realize that the people they're killing are people. There's nothing like doing that to make them feel utterly horrified at chopping up bad guys.
Oh god, there's babies!
Not the babies!
Phil, I hear about how the Beastmen are ignored by the Dark Gods, but it seems like they never have much issue receiving more mutations. Do they want more? Has that question been explored? Generally speaking, the Beastmen have that. Broadly speaking, the lore suggests that the Beastmen welcome mutation because they see them as gifts. And that's pretty standard for like the full in chaos races, is that mutation is a gift. And like Beastmen, one of the really cool things about Beastmen, they take care of their chaos spawn. Their chaos spawn are not just like wild, horrible beasts to like be chained up and beaten and then unleashed on the enemy. They're often seen as, they're not seen as failures, which they can be seen as within the Warriors of Chaos. In the Beastmen, it's like, oh, look how many gifts this entity has received, this individual. Truly, they were worthy of these things, and they are valued, and they are fed, and they are led into battles. Now, granted, the Beastmen know that Chaos Spawns are so fucking insane that they'll attack anything near them, so they're cautious about it. But often the times, they don't use chains and ropes, but instead use sorcery or just their own ingenuity to keep the Chaos Spawn moving with the Bray herds. Does Malagor have any overt ties to the Tzeentch, the Changer of Ways, other than his affinity with crows and magic?
Overt. Overt is a pretty heavy word.
Yeah, I would say he actually, as strange as it may seem, he doesn't have really any overt ties to Tzeentch. He is undivided. He is a servant of all the ruinous powers. A lot of people, they go, oh, wizard must be Tzeentch, but that's not how it works. Now, would Tzeentch take a lot of delight in what Malagor does? Yes, absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. But so do the other three.
Yeah, agreed completely. I'd say that Malagor is not one of your aligned characters. They could, of course, align him with ease if they wish to do so, but I could make an argument for, well, 3 of the Chaos Powers easily, 1 of them with a stretch, and with 2 standing high above the others because of some of the close associations. But I could make all 4 with a bit of a thought and a bit of nailing it down. So yeah, no, undivided. I think that works better.
Drums or horns for devotee of corn? If you mean like
yes,
yes, especially if you make them out of bloody bits. That is often really, really good stuff. I like when corn has like uses flesh of people to make nasty bloody things. Skull drums. Skull drums. Chris, I liked Malagor and Dodgy Johan, the advisor, to meet and debate crow matters. I feel like well, actually, you can do that by just playing a Malagor campaign in Total War. Especially because if you
100%.
Yeah, especially if you, I don't know if he still has the same intro. I don't think he does anymore. But if you do the intro for like Warhammer 2 or Warhammer 1, you play Malagor campaign, Dodgy Johan talks to Malagor in the intro, which is fun. So if you haven't,
There is.
check that out.
Yeah, go for it.
Is
Thanks very much
Malagor
for that one,
interacting with Kazrak? It is extremely likely they've met, but we don't have any specific mentions of the meeting.
One of the biggest issues with Malagor is just how few inclusions there is of him, given just how much
To be fair,
potential
the old world's a big
weight they have. Yeah, it totally is. I would, given the weight that we're about to move on to, because we have finally reached the end of those super chats.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, by the way. That was a slightly longer break than we intended as we worked our way through all of those. One of the great issues with Malagor is that he's given a great well of potential history. He's given a character that clearly has extraordinary weight and portent with him. He is important. But that importance is not really reflected at all in how much they used him, because he was a special character that dropped in 7th. He had some special rules that are kind of funky. His model came out, and let's be honest, those wings were not good. The model was not great. It wasn't the best. Because if we haven't made it clear already, Malagor has giant freaking wings.
Yeah,
because we haven't already covered that part. Huge wings, but the model, the model had like, it's got kind of
it looks like a cape.
It looks and a bad cape at that. But I think it's definitely the point where we take a pause and go back to just how old do you think Malagor is, Loremaster of Sotek?
Yeah, so thanks to the Wood Elf 8th edition army book, according to that lore, Malagor is at least hundreds and hundreds of years old. But in his original 7th edition lore, it is deeply, deeply implied that he is thousands of years old, which is kind of insane.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that would make him the oldest Beastman, except for maybe Morgr. And Morgr is a very weird, bizarre case.
In many respects, I push Morgr at the side and say, not normal. Yeah. Let's stick with Malagor.
Yeah, so Malagor, one of my favorite mention of him in the writing, obviously he's very heavily inspired by, for those unaware, there's a cultural a trope known as Black Phillip, which is the idea of a black goat that represents Satan in our world. Like, it's like, oh, the goat represents the devil. Has existed for a really long time. Black Phillip is often the name that's kind of associated with that concept. You see it in like a lot of movies that use that kind of cultural thing. Like, they made a movie called like The Witch, which has like literally Black Phillip as a character. And it's a really fucking creepy ass horror movie that's actually really well made. But the idea is that Malagor represents an almost, he's quite literally painted as a Satan figure from the Church of Sigmar's perspective, which I'm actually glad that the 7th edition book calls it that out specifically, where it literally says that he has been vilified by the cult of Sigmar over millennia to be they have painted him as this evil antagonist to what Sigmar represents, which is, of course, the unity of humanity within the Empire, the unity of Sigmar's heirs, that they literally paint Malagor as kind of like the devil, who is the ultimate antagonist, who, if you see a thing with crow's wings come flying over your town, that is the harbinger of disaster. That is quite literally the antagonist, like in the true sense of the word, or like in the true sense of the, the word Satan being the great enemy, being the translation. He has come, and this is going to be the ultimate test of your faith, is how they have painted him. That he's been around for and that's the thing that really, for me, cements that he is that old.
Yeah,
is that
I agree.
He's become a myth.
I mean, we're looking at a religion that is 2,500 years old if we're talking from the perspective of the end times. And to have its most ancient text portraying this bewinged, horned entity as the ultimate portent of effectively evil, for want of a better word, speaks to not just how old he is, which is important. Yes, of course, you could claim that these texts are prophecies of what's to come next. I say bullshit to that mostly. It's a reading you can take if you wish to. Malagor could be only a few centuries old. Certainly old enough to have attacked Athelloren, but not necessarily as old as it could be. But for me, it seems clear he's at least as old as Sigmar. And I think the great untold story is that he almost certainly faced off against Sigmar. Because why the hell else would he be depicted as such a core enemy? And if you are looking to build a new story for Sigmar back in that era, almost certainly you want to go with the ever-chosen of the era and the fact that Malagor was there. Malagor was the one that possibly even beat Sigmar's ass down at one point, because we need to have a very clear story of why he is the antagonist to that cult. And it's super clear that he is. He has not only committed great blasphemies back in the past, throughout time, from the point of Sigmar onwards, whenever he arrives, he is the portent of doom. He arrives, he wipes out the Sigmarite temples, he murders all the Sigmarites, he moves on. He is not only a metaphorical, let's say, bad guy, Satan equivalent, he is a quite literal one as well. He's real, he's alive, and he's doing shit. That being the case, you're left with a very clear, hey, if they'd done 8th edition, would they have just gone, you know what? Malagor's been around for about 3, 4, 5,000 years, maybe since the Cataclysm, could have been one of the very first ones. And he is almost the advisor type. He's sitting behind many of the great powers that have worked their way down through chaos over the course of millennia. And during the great incursion of chaos in Sigmar's time, Malagor was there. And if I was writing it, he is the one that would hand Sigmar his ass.
Damn it. Of course you fucking say something that like blows my mind. That would be such a good story for explaining two big things. A, like Andy said, exploring why the Church of the Cult of Sigmar has held on to Malagor as the great enemy, the one that they preach about to such an extent that, so for those unaware, like Malagor has this rule called "something wicked this way comes," which is just, you know, a very classic quote, but it's also one of the most badass special rule names. But when it talks about the actual entry for what that entails, Malagor is so deeply ingrained into the human psyche as a threat that when people see him, they start weeping and losing their shit because they're seeing a literal embodiment of something they are terrified of, which is that primal hunger of the wilds to come down and tear down everything you have built and to trample it into the dirt. Like, he is a deeply, deeply feared figure for humanity.
In fact, I'll go further. He's a deeply disturbing figure to everyone, because the rule does not just apply to humanity. It applies to everyone. And it means that you can't use the leadership of your general. Now, if you've played Warhammer, you know how freaking important that is, especially for some species. If you're playing against greenskins, getting that strong leadership near the center to ensure all your goblins et al. Don't run away is essential. Malagor drops down from the sky and they fucking run everywhere. That deserved a swear word, because they freaking do. And it's really bad news. Malagor is an entity. He's beyond just a simple beastman. He is something that causes terror fundamentally within amongst everyone, yet simultaneously does not have the terror rule, as I recall.
Like, it's interesting that
he doesn't.
He quite literally sucks courage out of the room, essentially. He sucks bravery out of the room. He makes you go, you are the prey, and I and my herd, we are the predators.
Yeah, and they're left with, basically, in terms of the rule, their own leadership only. The only way they can use their general's leadership is if they're in the same unit. So that basically means where normally you might look out and say, my general's over there, everything's okay, on a loose fashion at least. Instead, you're just looking at that going, holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And the only thing that's in your mind is your own courage. It's your own courage that stands, and that's it. And if you happen to be a courageous person, you might hold. If you're not, you're hiking it out of there, because everything else around you no longer matters. All that matters is you as an individual. And I think that's a super fun rule.
Yeah. And so going back to what Andy was saying about Morgr having potentially fought Sigmar, I love that. And that would make a ton of sense for Malagor to have gone up against Sigmar, and would explain why Malagor hates the Sigmarites more than anybody else.
Oh, yeah.
Like, he has a deep, deep hatred for the cult of Sigmar compared to the other cults. Now, granted, he goes after everybody, Like he has one magical item, which is the icons of vilification, which are quite literally, a lot of people are like, oh, that must be like some kind of relic of the dark gods. No, it's actually more horrific than that. It's basically his trophies. Whenever he destroys a sacred site or he murders a priest of any cult, any god, he takes little bits and pieces, and that aura of wrongness, the ramification, the radiant energy of his desecration is quite literally radiating off of him, and it screws with people a lot. Like it makes the Beastmen get all amped up, and they get like really even more aggressive, and they're getting almost, they get frenzied off of this energy, this palpable aura of we are going to ruin everything. They get a kind of like high off of it, which is very, very spooky in that he is quite literally radiating a force of even gods will be torn down. Everything will be torn down. But what I want to say is that to reinforce the Sigmar thing, one of the things that I love that you could do exploring that story is that one of the things with the Cult of Sigmar is that if you look at the actual like rules of Sigmar, Sigmar did not like magic. Which there have been explorations in like the Black Library book about how he had a couple of bad run-ins with magic where he fought like Morath the Necromancer, and that didn't go over great. And he wore Sigmar's crown for a while, or Nagash's crown for a while, which made Sigmar's crown technically as well, which did things to him and allowed him to use magic, which was a good and then kind of a very, very bad thing. But one of the things that I love is that you also have like the witch that he deals with, who the whole thing of Sigmar's first love dying. But that would really add a lot of weight to why Sigmar would be so afraid of magic. Is if, like Andy said, Malagor beat him. That if Malagor showed up with the Beastmen Brayherds and Sigmar was dealt a defeat, where of course he personally survived, but either the Empire as a whole or just the Unbarragans or whoever, which by the time Sigmar was born, Malagor is already a myth. He is already a known entity that brings ruination. But if him and Sigmar have this showdown and Sigmar loses the first time because of Malagor's sorcery, that would be a huge, deep explanation for why the Cult of Sigmar hates magic so deeply and why Sigmar, one of his core tenets, was do not trust the witch.
Yeah, quite. I couldn't agree more. And again, this is nothing more than speculation on our part, but definitely if I was writing it and looking at it and attempting to provide context and understanding to a situation that they have established without providing any reason for why it's the case, it would wrap everything up in a nice little bow to be tied off and for everyone to go, you know what? That answers everything. I will also say, for those of you out there who go, but wait, Sigmar couldn't have his ass handed to him. To have characters that never have their asses handed to them is to really make them not only unrealistic, but boring. Characters have to suffer defeats that they move on from, learn from, and then hopefully arc into their next success. These defeats are what define us and what turn us into hopefully better people or worse people, depending upon the nature of the story at hand. And in this case, it is essential that Sigmar not only has great successes, he has great failures. If all he can do is succeed, it makes him unexciting to read about. It makes him unexciting as a character because whenever he walks into a room, you're like, well, Sigmar's going to succeed then, isn't he? Because, hey, it's not going to be a problem for him. So I think this would be a good way of resolving that. We do know. I think
it would also. Oh, sorry. Just the last thing I'm going to say on that is that I think it would also lend credence to Malagor's deep distaste for Sigmar. If Sigmar then later rallies people together, if he does the exact thing that stabs at Malagor's strength, where it's not that he beat up Malagor by hitting him with his hammer, but instead that after that loss, he rallies humanity together. He rallies his people together and inspires them to fight Malagor again. And that time they win through his leadership, through Sigmar the leader, which would be a direct smack in the face to what
Yeah.
Malagor represents.
And I reckon you have yourself a good shattering of the great herdstone that they were worshipping around by Galmaraz.
Oh, yeah.
That gets shattered. Malagor and Sigmar probably never even meet, because what happens is the Beastmen themselves are shattered and retreat. Malagor along with them, meaning that Malagor isn't so much defeated as he retreats, where Sigmar was defeated before that. So we still get to have that little bit of spice sitting between them. Yeah, I think this is all great. In terms of how old he is, though, to make sure that we don't lose that general theme, we know that he's not probably from the Cataclysm, in that by the time that Malagor was born, his birthing was seen to be a great thing. So he's definitely born. He's not mutated into this. He already has the wings at birth. The concept of the Bray Shaman is in place. The concept of the Bray Shaman advising the various herds is in place. So we already have culture, and a relatively deeply ingrained culture in place. So if you want to try and contextualize that within the entirety of Beastmen's history, well, they don't have much of a history, but you can say that it's certainly post the Cataclysm, probably by at least 1,000, if not a couple of thousand years.
I think if I was going to throw a dart at the board, I would say it would make sense for him to probably be born after the elves and dwarves had taken over a lot of the old world, but we're still in their golden age, where he gets the time to develop this deep hatred of what gods bring to civilization.
Yeah, definitely.
And
in fact, having him witness the great rise of humanity over the course of approximately 1,000 years before Sigmar's time up to Sigmar's time is perfect, because we get to see the influence of the elven gods. We get to see the rise of the human gods, the importing of various peoples from different parts of the world into the old world, and what they do to everything that Malagor holds sacred, which is effectively crush it if it lies before them. It's very easy for us to try and think of the humans as the good guys and the beastmen as the bad guys. Always try to think about the bad guy's motivation, for want of a better description.
Yeah.
And having his lands infiltrated, destroyed, the great forests cut down, the fields spreading outwards, and seeing the source of all that being effectively the great gods of civilization that humanity worships. You already have a very strong sense of why he would end up with the character that he has. That then develops into ruination, the desire for the dark gods to bring it down and turn it into something else. And then we have the events with Sigmar, perhaps one, if not another, ever chosen. That would, I think, nail him completely into place, giving us 2,500 years worth of old world terror causing. The biggest issue I have with all of that, for all it makes a beautiful story, is where the fuck is all the descriptions of the various horrific things that he's done for the last 2,500 years? And that, for me, is the biggest flaw of the character. The fact that he is never really used. He's never really mentioned. He has absolutely no impact on the Warhammer world at all, yet simultaneously has a description that suggests he wouldn't just have a big impact, he'd have a freaking huge one. But again, as is often the case for the bad guys, when they're written up, they're given their one-page spread, they try to write it as over the top as they can, they move on, and writers that come later just forget that these one exist, particularly because Malagor was in a single army list. Just once, 7th. That's it. And then he gets used once or twice after that, a little bit in the end times, and then we're done. It's a bit of a shame.
It is. I think let's get caught up on Super Chats really quick, and then I think it'll be a good time to dive into what he actually does in the Wood Elf book.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea.
Lidor, would love for the Norska and the Beastmen to be explored. Not only would could I see these two cultures potentially living together, but also gives them some cool flavor where we have these brutal but surprisingly open, in some ways, egalitarian cultures. Chaos, but not chaos. Yep.
First, thanks for the super chat. That was really generous. Thanks so much, Leder. That was super awesome. But broadly for this one, I couldn't agree more. Norska provides an opportunity to explore different styles of culture in a way that the Empire is very tightly sewn up and just doesn't, even though it's hinted at in multiple books. But Norska allows the battle game in particular to say, here, things are complicated in a different way. And I would sorely like that to occur, because the Beastmen, as it currently stands, for all they are a stupendous species in terms of what Warhammer offers, they are a massively underwritten one with very little depth. and very little character beyond, yay, we charge out the forest and hack. So I think this would be a perfect opportunity. I agree completely. That's a really nice idea, Letter.
Yeah. Phil, so do the Beastmen want more than gifts of mutations from the dark gods then? Was this explored? So the best way I can answer this is that generally speaking, when the books kind of address what the Beastmen want, is that they want the return of what life was like before humanity and the elves and the dwarves showed up and started screwing with everything. They want a return to what is often kind of called like the age of the beast, which is basically an era of just primal, just letting things be as they naturally are. Granted, that natural includes the taint that was brought in by chaos, but allowing things to just be without trying to force order and to force the world to adhere to certain rigid rules and structures. There's actually a thing where it's almost kind of strongly implied that the Beastmen have kind of come to terms with the fact that they can't win this fight by themselves. They can't realistically tear down all of humanity and the elves and the dwarves and everything they've built to return to the age of the beast. So they need the dark gods. They need their help. They need their sorcery. They need their influence. Because with that, even though it'll be a chaos corrupted age of primal beastfulness, I don't know what word I'm going for there, but savagery,
sit back enjoying this.
Yeah, it will at the end of the day be essentially kind of what they want. That's the promise that chaos essentially makes to them, is that they can take back what used to be theirs, which chaos is probably lying its ass out about.
Oh, chaos lies about everything, doesn't it? That's the whole point of it. It's got one end in mind, assuming that you want to ascribe a mind to it, and it will largely succeed at this come the end, and that's the absolute annihilation of everything. But hey, the Beastmen continue.
And that's personally why I really, really love the Age of Sigmar version of the Beastmen, where they seem aware of that. They are aware that the Dark Gods cannot be trusted.
So, Song of Power drops in. What themes and special units would surround a character like Malagor? There's an obvious first step, and that's that whenever Malagor comes, he's generally heralded by great carrion birds swooping through the sky. So, if you're looking for an obvious extra additional unit, or alternatively, things that could come with them as a special character, would be great carrion birds. Now, we've got the obvious crows, which are mentioned multiple times, but they're certainly not the only carrion birds that you get in the Warhammer world. And if you want to dial it up to 11 a bit, we could have ourselves literally the equivalent of the undead carrion, but living, swooping down along with Malagor. That'd be brilliant.
Think about like how crazily chaos has mutated a pig to make a razor gore. Now apply that concept to a big vulture. You're already starting off with a big bird with like a 6-foot wingspan. Now let chaos go wild on that thing. What's it going to look like?
Yeah, and if you're really going for, let's say, an 8th edition version of Malagor, Malagor himself would be bigger, hunched over, probably with some sort of twisted hand about to do some great magic, enormous pair of wings sitting behind him, possibly up on a flying stand or some equivalent, and surrounded by huge flying creatures. If you wanted to go even further, you can drop some Ungor on top of some of them, throwing spears or something like that. But I don't think that's necessary. I think keeping him simple is better than complicated. I probably wouldn't add any extra units per se, because he is an advisor character. He's not a leader. So this isn't someone who brings his beastmen with him. This is someone that goes to another herd and says, hi, I know you're doing this, but have you considered smashing this idol instead? I have a somewhat iconoclast perspective on all of this, and we should bring down anything that is, well, God-based. So I would prefer not to have a special unit, but I think having something like a bunch of birds that come along with him is not just appropriate, that matches how he's been described in the past. So if we were doing an upgrade of him, doing something like that is great carrion birds, I think would be super fun.
Yeah, and for themes, anything you could do where you're like taking themes or identifiable markers of cults and then twisting them, having them be despoiled by Malagor and having that somewhere on his person or around him works super duper good. Where like he's got like little icons and pieces of the different cults or little pieces of their holy script, but he's done things to them and they're clearly wrong.
And the base is probably like a ruined temple or some equivalent with bits and pieces of half broken, shattered remnants of whatever cult it used to be coming from that, with him flying above it. He's the sort of model that, well, I remember when it very first came out, and I looked at it and I went, "Is that fucking it?" Because I had already in my mind just this image of a big, terrifying beastman, and when I saw it, I was like, "That is not a big, terrifying beastman."
Sam, with Beastmen being morally complex with a possible tall connection, do you ever think there could be a polar opposite to Malagor, like an order or just not Malagor version, trying to bring about a more peaceful coexistence? It could theoretically exist. I think there could be a like priest of tall type Beastman if you were exploring that tall route, which, you know, a high priest of tall or someone that has a lot of tall's influence would be a powerful individual. Like, just, you know, think about how scary battle priests are. A beastman, a creature that isn't itself a wild beast, would, if it had Tall's blessings, could theoretically unleash some pretty awe-inspiring holy magic, essentially. The prayers that it would unleash would probably be quite powerful. Granted, its version of peaceful coexistence would be very unique, because you would have to explore it from a very strong Tall-like perspective. Purely Tall. It doesn't care about what humans want. It cares about what Tall wants. That can include humans, but they have to follow really, really strict and specific rules. It would probably be a very dangerous character if you just ran into him willy-nilly.
Yeah. When you're looking at something like this, you're loosely attempting to pin down what story am I trying to tell here. And the story of the Beastmen being more complex is worth telling in some fashion or another. And having a character that is the anthropomorphization of that, for all I know, it's not a humanization of it here because it's a Beastman, but the Beast of more man performance, blah, 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 whatever, one of them, is not a bad idea. I don't think I would prefer to pitch it as an opposite Malagor, because in many respects that would make the character less interesting, because what you would be doing is saying, see the other character, here's another one. And it would make him less unique or her less unique. Her might be a fun alternative because they're all pretty much freaking men around here. And there is definitely some Beastman women that apparently have been ignored. So broadly, I like the idea, but I would be looking to pin down the exact story you're telling and build a character for that, rather than start from the grounding point of let's build an opposite of something we already have.
Yeah, that's not that. You're doing yourself a disservice if you start.
Yeah, loosely, but still a great idea in general.
If Malagor pulled a Charles Xavier and formed a team of superpowered mutants who would be members of the Warhammer Fantasy X-Men, what are their powers? Okay, this sounds. I will say we're gonna get into that because he kind of does that when he invades the Wood Elf territory. So we'll talk about that in a minute. It's not quite that level of crazy, but once again, the important thing about Malagor is he's not your leader. He is the advisor. He is someone that shows up and takes advantage of the resources that are already there and tries to direct them on a specific current, as opposed to like going and recruiting the Avengers of Beastmen to follow him around and carry out his duties. That's not how he operates.
Yeah, 100% that. Oops, sorry, did I miss one there?
Yeah, yes. Why aren't Skaven and Bull Centaurs considered Beastmen seeming to our beast? That is a great question. The lore kind of hand waves it really, really fast because Beastman is not really an appropriate descriptor, to be frank.
Terrible descriptor. That should be the Gores.
Yeah, they should be Gores. Because the thing in Beastmen, the roster Beastmen, is it even goes out of its way to say that like the models you see are not all the Beastmen. It's just like a simplified version. The only thing that defines Beastmen is that they live, the Beastmen of the old world specifically, is that they live out in the forests and the wilds, and they have horns, whether they're little nubs or they're big horns. Their horns are quite literally considered to be the only unifying feature of them as a race or a species, which is crazy. That's a very broad and not specific thing to unify an entire species.
For all they try to say they're all the same, they then have nice little bits saying the Ungor are the ones with the tiny horns. The Gores are the ones with the bigger horns. The best of Gore are the huge ones with the huge horns. And it's The whole thing, when you look at it, doesn't make a great deal of sense. But it's at least a starting point. Right. So first, to answer, are Skaven Beastmen? Yes, they
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
they are, and they would be recognized as beastmen because beastmen is a really useful term for example, for people of the Empire, for Tilia, people of the Old World. They'll look at them and say beastmen, and the Skaven look no different to any other beastmen to them. So, in terms of who's using that term, in this case, it's Old Worlders. Yeah, if they saw a bull centaur, they would probably go, "That's probably not a human. I'm going to call it a beastman."
Beast man.
Yeah, indeed. Where those who know of it, their culture, and the fact they've got their own names might term them according to how they're known. But remember, try not to think of this as a blanket. Everybody does this. In the Warhammer world itself, most people are pretty ignorant. They see a thing, they call the thing whatever they can. They have no idea about its proper name. The proper name is for army lists. The proper name is for a different medium. Pardon me. But here, absolutely, they most certainly would be considered by many as beastmen.
Yeah, and it's worth noting the Beastmen do not call themselves Beastmen. I know in Total War they do, but that's because it's the Beastmen playable faction, so they're like, oh, well, that's their identifying thing. Like the only term they often tend to refer to themselves is the Children of Chaos, which is a very
and the cloven ones,
yes,
which I find very,
which is also
a name.
A lot of them don't have hooves.
They
like
don't have...
Centaurs don't have hooves.
I know,
which is like okay, but
Children of Chaos is a better option, or the Gores, if you're looking at the stable mutation that most Beastmen represent.
Yeah, but yeah, Beastmen is quite generally like we kind of understand what they mean by it, but if you, it's kind of like in that famous philosophy thing of like describe a human, and then if you try and describe it, like some asshole philosopher will show up with like a plucked chicken or whatever. Beastmen kind of fall under that nebulousness.
Oh, those asshole philosophers. Hey, cool. Malagor versus Azazel, or Azazel if you must. Who is the big religious enemy between the two? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think it would depend on who was giving the sermon that day.
Yeah. You've got to remember that the Warhammer world is much more complex than one. It's not just there is the big bad guy. Who's the big religious enemy? Nagash. He's the big religious enemy. They also stand against greenskins. So drawing upon one warlord or another is also a big religious moment. It's not who is the big one. They all are for different reasons. It's a complicated cult.
Yeah, I would say from what evidence we have, Malagor is older than Azazel.
I'd say so.
And he also is feared by a lot more, where even dwarves and elves and all these other guys are like, oh, fuck, it's Malagor. Whereas Azazel is pretty heavily isolated to kind of like the cult of Ulrich and the cult of Sigmar. Obviously, he's a big bad for the Empire, but he doesn't show up often. And he has a pretty big hate boner for his old buddy Sigmar.
I am not sure where this is coming from. I feel like I missed something.
This and then Sigmar's greatest champion. That is a lot of characters. I don't. Why?
This is some slash fic happening right here.
Why is there a Sigmarite Karl Franz harem? Okay, Hammond.
You need to explain yourself a little bit there. I wasn't quite sure what was going on.
Have Malagor and Morgor ever met? No. Do they respect each other? I don't think respect is the right word.
Respect's an interesting term.
Morgor very likely has no idea Malagor even exists. Malagor, we're going to talk about in the Wood Elf story. Like I said earlier, do I think that he... I don't think respect would be the right word. I think he would recognize Morgor as divine, but that would not necessarily translate to respect. Do you think that the lack of relatable... Morgan Crescent, thank you. Do you think the lack of relatable Beastmen characters due to them being displayed from the Empire's perspective? Yes.
Yes.
Even the Beastmen army book...
really annoying.
The Beastmen
because they don't do that with other armies as much.
Yeah,
they do notice them. The Dark Elves get a bit of this, where they often portray the Dark Elves from the High Elf perspective, as if High Elves and Dark Elves are somehow different. So you get a bit of that there, but it's nowhere near as deep as it is here, where the Beastmen are purely described from the perspective of the things they fight, rather than from their own perspective. And it is, I feel, massively wrong.
Yeah, like there's a super cool piece of artwork that shows the entire Warhammer world. Beastmen with good intentions is a tall order. Oh my god, get out.
I love that one.
there's a map that shows where the Beastmen are in the entire Warhammer world, and it literally is like a growth of cancer or roots from a tree growing all over the world, which means that there would be tons of different Beastmen cultures, tons of different kinds of Beastmen, tons of really cool special characters. Unfortunately, we only get the Empire Beastmen.
And a really weird, it's really frustrating. I remember when I first saw that map and I was like, fucking yeah, they're doing something here. And then you look at what they're doing and the answer is they're doing the Empire again. Oh,
yeah,
man.
Like, honestly, if you're a Beastman fan, some of the most exciting shit about getting like playable Grand Cathay and Kislev and Kingdoms of End, all the stuff, is that they're gonna show the Beastmen in those areas and what they're like and how they're different. And maybe even like named ones. And that would be super exciting because hopefully they would be very strange compared to the Beastmen we have in the old world.
Imagine a Beastmen army list that wasn't focused on just the Empire. It'd be a little bit like having a vampire army list that wasn't just, I don't know, counts from Sylvania. Imagine that vampires were entirely summed up as only and only the Karstein line. That would be a really poor way to express vampires in terms of what they are to the Warhammer world. There are multiple other bloodlines, including some that are potentially lost. But the Beastmen are pretty much characterized as only the ones in the old world, and that's about it. And it's a bit rubbish.
Yep. Has any legendary Beastman lord, including my Malagor, made it to Age of Sigmar? Morgur. Morgur is a
good old Morgur.
Yeah, he's still around. He's a full-on god, but it's very, very heavily implied he's going to be a playable character, probably in the next 1 or 2 editions. They've been building up to the return of Morgur. Necromancer Cobalt, thank you for the super chat. This stream is fascinating. All I knew about Malagor before is that he's a magic-using winged beastman who didn't fly in the original Total War until Tarax was released. Yes. Though, to be fair, if they had made him flying in the original game, I think he would have just gotten like mobbed instantly by other flyers because he didn't really have anything to protect him. Now he's got a lot more goodies that fight alongside him. But yeah, no, it took. I'm glad we finally unlocked flying technology for him in Total War. Phil, I'm sorry for what I'm about to ask, but this question is a massive argument with my circle of friends. Are Bray Shamans, in fact, from the Bray subspecies of Beastmen or not? So the term Bray is used for, there's a lot of terms that get thrown around for Beastmen where you have Bray herds and Bray shamans that a bray is literally, to bray is a sound that like goats make. They bray. So that is likely what it is referring to. But considering they use the term Bray herds when they're talking about just an entire Beastman herd, I would say they are probably not a subspecies in the sense that they're not like a very distinct, like they are gifted with magic. They are gifted with the ability to hear the dark gods and to get visions from the gods and to perform rituals and do all these other things. So I wouldn't call them a subspecies unless you also consider wizards to just be a subspecies, which, to be fair, you theoretically could. So that's kind of a complicated question or answer, rather. I don't know how Andy feels about like considering wizards like a species or a subspecies.
Right. So, I'm trying to. Sadly, I can't recall with the first point where they use Bray to describe them, and I want to go back to the original Realms of Chaos books just to double check that. So first part of my answer is let me go check me sources because I've not checked those ones in a while, because the Beastmen got quite a bit of additional detail in there. It wasn't much, it was like 5 or 6 pages, but there might be a source in there that I'm not contemplating at the moment. But in general, it's just a cool name what they did use to mark out their shamans from just being shamans. They didn't just call them shamans, they called them Bray shamans. And then they basically give them the standard write-up, as I recall, which is these are the ones who are born with magic. Beastmen with magic are called Bray shamans. They're the ones who speak to the, I don't know, they speak to their Beastmen lords, who are the representation of the Beastmen and all their ideals, and they effectively sit there whispering secrets in their heads, much like they're probably getting whispered secrets from dark gods or demons or something, because they're magically sensitive. So they're basically just magically sensitive Beastmen. But the name may have an older form that I'd like to check up. And I wouldn't say that they are indeed a subspecies of Beastmen, in that the Beastmen themselves, first things first, it's hard to pin down exactly what sort of species they are anyway. They are full with all sorts of different bloodlines and strains as well. And to even try to identify one part as a separate species, I think would be folly. The Beastmen are such a mixture of different bloodlines. And they, when they breed true to magic, they are singled out as Bray Shamans. And that's not a great answer. I'm going to go check that one up further. If you're ever in my Discord, give me a ping down there, and I'll go do a little bit of extra reading up, because I'm almost certain there's something I've missed there. There's like a fact that's in the back of my head.
Okay, Hammond was saying that Sigmar would probably be very disappointed in his eventual inheritor of his throne because he has so many magic lady friends.
You know, you say that, but yeah, Sigmar, he put out about a bit as well.
It's true. Yeah, a lot of it. When he had to, yeah. But Mandatus, Caleb, just letting you two know, you convinced me to make a Zing Sorcerer Lord of Gnome.
Yes!
Closest kid batch I can think of is a Goblin Hero. You're welcome.
Go for it! Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing that.
If you for that.
yeah, Mandatus, that's freaking awesome. I hope you paint it up, and if you do drop it down in the Discord server, because I need to see it. Make sure you tag me, because if I miss that glorious creature, I will be deeply, deeply unimpressed with myself, if nothing else. Mandatus, mwah, beautiful.
Any thoughts on the 8-men, Lakemen, Nagaroth Beastmen, Ymir, etc.? There's that section of the 6th edition that mentions them as a subspecies. Yeah, so there's a lot of mentions actually about the different kinds of Beastmen that are encountered in other parts of the world, where like the Knights of the Grail mentions the Lakemen that can be found in certain parts of Bretonnia, which are believed to be a kind of Beastmen. Same thing for the Ymir, which are considered to be like Norscan Beastmen and stuff like that. But that kind of goes to what Andy said earlier about the term Beastmen is kind of useless, because like, yeah, those are all technically Beastmen, but so are Skaven.
Yeah.
And so are Lizardmen.
There would be no reason not to include Skaven inside the Beastmen army list, except for the fact that they are so unique that they aren't. But if you wanted to be completionist, you could easily include Skaven in the Beastmen army list, as crazy as that may sound, because they sort of are.
Yeah, so it's kind of that thing of like, where would you draw the line between, what is a unique species and what's simply a subspecies of what we understand to be Beastmen? That's a really fuzzy line, like super fuzzy.
Completely.
So good luck on that, because I don't have an answer for you. Hi guys, Excessive, thank you very much for the super chat. Just started watching Lawhammer, so good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I've heard really good. I haven't caught up yet because I think I'm 2 episodes behind, but I've heard really good things about this past Friday's episode. Just wanted to ask, is there a specific ranking system with nobles in the Empire regarding titles such as Duke, Count, etc.?
Yes.
Good fucking luck. Yes.
Okay, so the answer is yes, but because of centuries of interscene warfare, conflicts, breakdowns of Empire, that the original definitions of them have changed over time, and where once it would have been very clear that a duke was over a baron, for example. Because of the multiple warfares and ancient treaties, in some cases, barons came along, conquered dukes, and allowed them to keep their titles while simultaneously ruling over them, meaning that there is this bizarre patchwork of titles sitting one above the other, sometimes the same title sitting above another one with the same title. So a duke that rules over another duke. It's an absolute mess. Now, that is to a degree born of multiple writers not understanding hereditary systems and how they work, but it's also now become somewhat of a feature of the Empire. The Empire is an actual tapestry of messed up titles, many of which, if you know what the titles mean, make little in the way of true sense, while simultaneously all of them are held bitterly onto by the people who told them, and they do not want to lose their titles. As a single example, in Nordland, pretty much everybody used to have a variety of titles or were conquered so badly by Midnime that they all became baronies, as what was once a mixture of counties and marches and similar all fell down to just being baronies because they were all effectively demoted when they had their arses handed to them. So, yeah, there's a variety of titles, but they are sadly not consistent, and it's a feature, not a bug. At least now it is.
The Grey Seers are the horned ones. Yes, they are. Which also opens hilarious things of like, if you try and say, oh, well, Beastmen have horns. Well, so does Skaven.
So does Skaven. Yeah, absolutely. And they're magically active ones too. There's a
Yeah,
whole thing.
they're literally just Skaven Bray Shamans. But CB4N, line could be drawn in interbreeding with humans. As far as what defines a Beastman, that potentially could work.
Yeah.
I would say that's actually reasonable. But that also kind of falls into, okay, well, what makes a mutant and what makes a Beastman? And is there a difference between those? And good luck with that one.
So for me, I think this is a defining line between Skaven as a species and Beastmen as a race of humanity, if you must. In that the Skaven, as far as we can tell, cannot interbreed with humans at all. They just can't. That doesn't mean that these things don't happen, because people gonna do that sort of thing, but the chances of it ever having a child outside of chaos interference and warpstone, okay, fair enough, they're Skaven, who knows what would happen. But broadly, I think that's a good dividing line, and it's probably why I would separate Skaven out if I was to make a proper taxonomical breakdown of them all. But Beastmen would most certainly be coupled with humanity, because they are effectively completely open to interbreeding, and it doesn't cause the equivalent of mules, for example, much like you get from donkeys and horses. You are not going to be born but infertile anymore. You're going to be born and can carry on.
Oh, you're talking about the Brays, not the Bray Shamans, but the Brays. Yes.
Ah, you mean the tiny wee Brays? Ah, you think for a book that I helped write, I'd have recalled that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That would have jumped out, right?
Yeah,
no, forgot it.
Are Brays a subspecies? Once again,
in the same way that Ungor aren't subspecies of Gore, aren't subspecies of Bestigor, they're all basically
they're all
just
the same.
one massive mess. And different terms have been used at different times for the same thing. If you're attempting to build them as separate species, well, that means that they don't interbreed. So let's then go for, are they sub-races? And I think the answer is no, not really. It's just a really, really messy thing. You could have a Bestigor having a child with a Bray, and they might have a completely different horn length that comes out of them.
Yeah, supposedly
it's complicated.
The only subspecies in the Beastmen is the Centigors. They are often considered to be like an entirely different thing that hangs out with the Beastmen. They're often treated as very, very different, and they're able to breed with like some weird shit. Because you have like Goros Warhoof, who's known as like the sire of 1,000 young, but he also has children who are monsters, like literal monsters, because he's porked everything. That is one of his defining things. So I would not consider Brays to be a subspecies, like Andy said, for those reasons.
They're just Beastmen, for want of a better term. Let's go for Gores, if you must. And Gores have different definitions within them that is based upon horn length, not upon their genetics.
Yeah. Necromancer Kobold, and then we're going to get back to talking about Malagor for a bit. Given the context of the stream, Malagor and most Beastmen would despise the Chaos Dwarfs. They would hate the Chaos Dwarfs.
Oh, yeah.
Hate with all capital letters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, the Beastmen would despise everything about Hashut and the Chaos Dwarfs, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they would not be friendly.
It's brilliant. But yeah, they'd not be friendly at all. It would be an absolute mess, which I love. So let's, before we get lost in everything else, turn to the Wood Elves.
Yes. So, and this is actually particularly exciting for the old world, because roughly 200 years ago, it's actually not time for it yet, but we're coming up on time for it. There's a big event that happens within the Wood Elf lore that's known as the Slaughter at Bleak Meadow, which is actually a pretty long story within the Wood Elf timeline. But basically what it breaks down to is that a couple decades earlier, Morgor gets killed again. And every time Morgor dies, the Beastmen kind of retreat a bit and start building up their forces again, waiting for him to get born somewhere. And then he has to be found, and then he has to grow to maturity. Because Morgor is the really spooky version of a mortal, where it doesn't really matter if you kill him, because he literally just shows up somewhere else. But so the Beastmen are disorganized. They're a mess. They don't have a leader, and they're all interfighting and doing all the things that happens when the leader is killed. And in comes Malagor, who's known as Mogruk by the Elves, the Lord of Crows. Which also goes to imply that he's very, very old, where the Elves have a different name for him.
And I'd use that. In fact, just that single line is, I think, citable as a source for saying that he is almost certainly pretty ancient. And any attempts to say that he's not should be immediately taken out the room and shot, because Malagor, Malagor just is.
Yeah, and the thing that's very, very, very interesting about this particular invasion is that the Wood Elves have been doing very, very well recently. Like Ariel was active, like she was back, she was no longer in isolation, and Orion was up and about. Things were going good. And Morgur launches an assault, but he doesn't do what, or sorry, Malagor launches an assault, but he doesn't do what Morgur does. Morgur is batshit fucking crazy. And Morgur basically points himself in a line and he goes that particular direction, and everything in his way is probably fucked, but maybe you'll be able to kill him. Malagor is smart. And what Malagor does is he shows up to all the forests around Bretonnia and the tribes that live in the mountains and the tribes that live in Athel-Loren itself, because Athel-Loren actually has a pretty large Beastmen population, which a lot of people like to forget about. But there's a ton of Beastmen that live in Athel-Loren because they know paths that even the elves don't. Because the forest is not always on the elves' side because it's a tricky little bitch. And Malagor goes around and talks to all of their leaders and gets everybody into shape because he is a herald of the dark gods. You do not argue with Malagor. You do as you're told because he has visions from the gods. He speaks with their voice. And if you do disagree with him, he will literally obliterate you pretty easily, to be honest. And Malagor gathers all of these war herds and he directs all of them to attack Athel-Loren simultaneously. And it leads to this horrible situation for the Wood Elves because the Wood Elves have one major flaw, which is that there's not a lot of them. They can't be everywhere at once. And so this war ends up being very unique in that Malagor takes advantage of all the Wood Elves' weaknesses, where he has the Beastmen attack from outside the forest, coming from all four cardinal directions, but then the Beastmen inside the forest also are attacking those same locations from inside, and the Wood Elves are almost completely overwhelmed. Like it talks about that there are several holdouts where you have like all your special characters, like the Sisters of Twilight are holding out in the Pine Crags, and Daith manages to hold his forge, but Daith is forced to literally open his forge and come out wielding weapons that he will not allow others to wield. So like a demigod has to take to the battlefield who normally does not like to fight because Malagor directs a threat directly at him, so he can't spread his arms and armor across the rest of the Wood Elves. Orion and the Wild Hunt are being overwhelmed. Like the entire forest is being assaulted simultaneously, and a bunch of really important Wood Elves die. Like there's a important beast handler type character, a guy who very deeply loves for the animals and cares for them in Athel-Loren. He gets murdered by the Beastmen, and it's awful. And the Wood Elves finally managed to bring Morgur to battle, or Malagor. Gosh damn, I keep saying that. They're very similar names. Malagor actually manages to get in a big fight with the Wood Elves, and the terrifying thing is he's winning. Like he just beats their asses. He beats them back, and it's getting ugly. And one thing the Wood Elves are keenly aware of is they're used to thinking that the tide of Beastmen rises and falls with Morgur. If Morgur is alive, it's really, really bad. But if he's dead, okay, we're fine. We're fine. Malagor disrupts this cycle, which is awesome. Because, and granted, I think this ties into what I said earlier of that I think Malagor knew he could not control Morgur. And for him, he wanted to take advantage of the gap, the power vacuum of Morgur being gone. Knowing that Morgur having recently been in the area means there were a lot of Beastmen tribes or herds hanging out, and now Malagor is taking the reins. And he's constantly giving this advisement. He's summoning all sorts of horrible monsters and monstrosities from the depths of the forest. He's unleashing horrible things that Beastmen can create, like the Pratons, which are literally the great stags of the forest, like Athel-Loren, transformed through horrible dark magic into really fucked up, nasty creatures. And he starts winning. And the other thing about Malagor is he doesn't overextend himself. He very deliberately attacks around the summer and he keeps attacking through the fall and into the winter. And the winter is when he really puts on the pressure because he knows Athalorn is at its weakest. A lot of the forest spirits are asleep or drowsy, and the wood elves, they are bound to that seasonal cycle where they rise and fall with the seasons. And the wood elves and Athalorn were flat out, undeniably losing. Malagor was beating them. And then something Malagor did not expect happened, which is the high elves show up.
Damn it.
Yeah, which is apparently this war lasted for long enough, at least most of a year, that the high elves, it mentions that Phoenix King Finnabar caught wind through either his people spying on various parts of the world or informants or whatever, that there were beastmen, Brayherds attacking Athalorn in unprecedented numbers. And he sends a big ol' army, and they go over and they fight alongside the wood elves, and Malagor cannot defeat them. Now, granted, he hurts them really bad. He hurts them so bad that in the aftermath of the final battle, Malagor is defeated. Nobody kills him, of course. He merely realizes that the battle is lost. Is like, fuck, all right, I'm out of here. But the battle was so bad that the relations between the wood elves and the high elves begins to break down, because the high elves look at all the casualties they've taken. They go, what the fuck? Like, we came all the way here to help these guys, and we got massacred for this? Like, and the wood elves are also a fairly isolationist, standoffish people.
Fairly.
So, yeah, fairly. Yeah, they're extremists, to be frank.
Yeah.
And they do not have the best manners, even by elf standards. And the shit got nasty between them, where the high elves were very, very upset at the losses they had taken, and wanted the wood elves to be appreciative. But from the wood elf perspective, they had suffered significantly more losses. And it's kind of embarrassing for an elf to have like heroes have to ride in and try to save the day. And it leads to nobody kills one another, but it leads to an ugly argument. And we have this building relationship that since Finnabar had become king, had been building up. It gets basically reset back to zero, where the relationship between the wood elves and the high elves frosts over, which kind of goes to show that even though Malagor did not succeed in destroying Athalorn, he did succeed in driving a very important wedge between a potential alliance that would have been devastating for the forces of chaos, especially because Asvar Kul is rising in the north during this time.
Yeah.
And it feels very deliberate, and I love that.
My summation and all that is yes. That is it. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a marvelous breakdown of what was, in terms of its open appearance, a potentially lethal allegiance for those that would stand against the elves, and it was thoroughly dismantled.
Yeah, and the thing about this is this goes the way Malagor really operates is that we can see that he is a conniving and cunning son of a bitch, and that Athalorn is often considered invincible, invulnerable, where it takes like a wah of unprecedented size to really threaten them, or the entire wrath of the dwarven realms. But in this case, they had a problem lurking among them that they were keenly aware of and genuinely believed they had under control, because history had shown they had it under control. And then Malagor shows up and completely just flips the script.
Yeah, and I think that's a single example of how this character, a character that is supposed to represent this great threat, was actually used pretty well. It is sadly, though, just once. And if you take a look at how he's used in the end times as a comparison, nowhere near as well. I think this is pretty damn fine.
Yeah, and to briefly touch on that before we get into super chats to talk about a couple of other little things, Malagor does feature in the end times. He is by far the most important Beastman character, because he's the only Beastman.
Sadly says little.
Yeah, which sadly does say little, because he's the only one that gets to show up in multiple books. He features very heavily in Nagash, which is book 1, and then he features again very heavily in book 4. which is Thanquol, because he participates in the Battle of Middenheim.
Yep.
But basically it breaks down to, he starts off pretty cool in that he basically starts getting a lot of visions for the Dark Gods about the resurrection of Nagash, and he goes, oh shit, I need to stop that. So he builds up a big old Bray herd, and he starts directing all of these war herds towards Sylvania to kill Nagash, or to stop Nagash from being resurrected, more accurately. Unfortunately for him, what basically happens is that, funny enough, the Beastmen stay on target. It's the dwarfs who fuck up because basically the vampire counts, Manfred in particular, Manfred uses like little forces of scouts to lure the dwarfs and the Beastmen slightly off course, so they end up running into each other. Yeah. And the moment the Beastmen see the dwarfs, they go, we want to fight. And Malagor is genuinely furious because he's trying to direct the Beastmen in a particular way, but once they get that battle fury upon them, he no longer can control them. And they basically just go and fight the dwarfs, which of course destroys both armies and leaves them both unable to deal with the Nagash resurrection scenario, which is fair. I
mean,
it's not particularly exciting.
If you're going to use a character to try and disrupt the Nagash build-up, why use Malagor? I mean, it's a fine enough story, sure, but Malagor is an iconoclast who's breaking gods. I'm breaking Sigmar. I'm breaking not Nagash. That's the undead. It's such a weak use of a character who's already got a very strong reason to exist. And I felt that, I remember when I read that bit, I was like, Malagor, really? I mean, it's nice to see him, but really? That's where you've gone? There's lots of other characters you could easily have plucked free to do that, and Malagor could have been used in so many more exciting ways, particularly given the depth of his potential age and what his own personal concerns were. You really, when you're looking at the end times, you want to take each one of the characters and go, who are they? What would they do in reality? Not just, we've got a big enemy we want to destroy, so let's grab a character and throw it at them. You go, who are they? What would they do? And how can I tell the best end to their story? Because the vast majority of them are going to die. So you're really looking for, how can I end Malagor's story well? And there's lots of ways you could have done that. And I don't feel that the end times made the best choice of it for him, pardon me.
Yeah. And, the sad thing is that they do a pretty good job of using like the whole thing of like, oh, he's the advisor role and he's really powerful and he leaves when shit gets bad and stuff. When he shows up in the fourth book, it's great because he's at the Siege of Middenheim and he's like directing the Beastmen and like, oh, he's going to try and snuff out the Flame of Ulrich. That is something Malagor would do. But then they run with this really silly moment where when he gets into the city proper, they basically run the idea of like, oh, chaos is going into ascendancy, and so as someone that can see visions, Malagor just goes like, he loses his shit, like he goes completely insane because he's being overwhelmed by visions, which
Sure.
and instead of being like the clever, awesome badass we all know and love, he kills a good number of people just by blasting spells, but he literally just sort of throws himself into the fight in a frenzy. And Gregor Martark, who is the new Supreme Patriarch of Beasts, who has also been at this point empowered by just a mess of spells, and kills Malagor very abruptly. He basically gets pincushioned with ice and he dies. And it's like, okay. All right. Is it the worst part of the end times? No. Is it a great part of the end times? Also no.
Yeah, completely agreed. Again, it's a poor use of the character. We had a really good potential story building here with the Ulrich and Flame and the fact that Sigmar had passed through this flame. You could have built a lovely couple of paragraphs because it doesn't need to be much. What you're doing is attempting to tell stories with each of the characters you've got, and ones that speak to why they exist and what they've done in Warhammer for the last, whether it's thousands of years or in real life, 10, 20, 30, 40 years worth of history that Warhammer has. And Malagor should have been pitched against something holy. So that means quite clearly, in this case, the flame, and his demise should have either been at the flame, or if he's going to die, something involving the flame, not just randomly getting taken out by Supreme Patriarchs. Get out of it. It's weak sauce that speaks to a lack of consideration and thought as to how to best use the characters that they'd built.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw that in the trash and go back to some cool shit real quick, though. We're going to catch up on Super Chat stuff, and then we're going to talk about one final 2 or 3 things with him, which is going to be super fun.
So it starts off with Phil. Are the Brays the only kind of beastmen that do become Bray shamans? I'm sorry, but we're French and we're pedantic, and we have to get the straight answer. The answer is no. Absolutely, categorically no. Shamans and the Bray shamans are the beastmen that can use magic. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter how they were brought about. They do not simply come from Bray stock. If they did, and they were still called Brays because they would have Bray stock, they'd have no horns, barely any horns at all.
Yeah,
that's
Bray
not the
shamans
case.
have huge horns.
They have big, huge curling horns, just like other beastmen. They are just beastmen. So the answer to that, Phil, as disappointing as you may find this, unless you're on the other side and you find this very pleasing, the answer to this is absolutely not. It's just a term that was used in this case to mark out the shamans as being beastmen versions. So they added Bray to the front of it. It's not a correlation through to being of Bray stock.
Yep.
Moving down to, we both did it.
Hey lads, love the stream. I have to thank you for getting me into fantasy. Have you any tips for role-playing Warhammer as opposed to other setting? Yeah, go watch Andy's many different streams and stuff. Also join his Discord because you can find a lot of people there to chat with about it.
Actually, I'm going to give you a proper call out. So I'm going to give you something to go to. I very recently did a stream with the Rookery about how to be a GM. And it wasn't just being a GM in general. It was being a GM for Warhammer, really, because that's the game that we were talking about. So if you want to have some specific...
He's going to post that in the chat for you.
I am going to do it right this second as I post this here. That, as I bring it up there, I'll just bring up the link for anyone who wants to just catch it on the screen. If you're watching it, there it is right there. I think I've got the right one. Go press those links and see if it works. That should work, although it's got a timestamp on it. I don't know if the timestamp is going to start you halfway through or not. Who knows? But there's a link. That's me GMing. That's a part of a set of streams where Andy Leask also discusses how to be a good player, and he references Warhammer a lot. And Lindsay, who did her stream just last Saturday, so that was just yesterday, she did one about how to best enjoy the game, particularly when you're dealing with a game that can be grim and bleak. You can get a lot of enjoyment out of it regardless, and she does a lovely chat, takes lots of questions about that. Strongly recommend it.
I'm still recovering from Lindsay deciding to call the Grand Theogenist G-Thong.
The G-Thong.
The G-Thong.
Oh no. Yeah, that made me laugh.
Storyline of Malagor stopping a god before they rise. That is absolutely something Malagor would do.
Yeah,
if he could get away with it. So that is a story you could definitely tell with him.
Definitely. Gods are a real thing in Warhammer, and gods do rise and fall also. And to have Malagor be responsible for something like that would be a key story to establishing him as something that is important in the setting. For example, if you want to really tie him through to an end time story, you would have had him back in the time of Sigmar going after the Flame of Ulrich and Sigmar protecting it, and perhaps something going wrong. That would have been loads of fun. And then when it comes to the end times, he tries to repeat what he did in Sigmar's time and gets laid low by somebody else, perhaps succeeding where Sigmar had failed in the past. There's a beautiful story you could tell there.
Yeah.
So there's loads of stuff.
That would also do really well for if you're wanting to tell the story of Sigmar having fought Malagor in the ancient past, of why Malagor might have been targeting him especially, or wanting to kill him because he's having visions of what Sigmar will become. And being like, I would like to squish that bug now before it becomes a big issue. Also, if you wanted to tell it from a Warrior of Chaos perspective in another really fun way, having Malagor killing someone before they become a demon prince could also be a really fun story.
Yeah, that would be a super fun story. And I think it would work very well for the character.
Malagor is used because Nagash was weak. That is the most annoying line that gets spammed by Vampire Count characters in Total War. They say that so much. Nagash was weak. Yeah, sure he was. Sure. Talk mean about him when he's not around to hear it. Ryan Woodall, who do you both think Malagor would be faced off against, or what will he be doing in the old world? So if they decide to use the lore that they wrote in 8th edition, which they very well may not,
yes, they might not.
Then we're going to get the Slaughter at Bleak Meadow, which means he's going to invade Athel Loren, which would be awesome. Great. Especially because like he convinces other special characters to show up, like Goros Warhoof plays a big role in the fighting. So that would be great. I'd love for them to use that story. It does seem that they are starting with the Battle of Arden, which the Battle of Arden was when Erloth goes to the Forest of Arden and faces off against Morgar the Shadowgave, which is when Morgar gets killed, leading to Malagor's arrival. Yep. That seems to be the scenario they're starting with, because we know that the Beastmen and the Wood Elves books are kind of like coming out as opposing one another for the War in the Border Prince timeline.
Perfect. It's just perfect.
Yeah,
I'm really hoping that they nail that.
Yeah, and if you look at the old world map, you can see that there's literally a Beastmen faction symbol and a Wood Elf faction symbol in the Forest of Arden, showing that they're about to face off. So hopefully that's what they're doing. And if so, that would be great, because then Malagor would literally be the big bad follow-up to the Morgar fight. Necromancer Cobalt, it's probably because Nagash is going to become a new god, even though that he was not to know that. It sounds like a smart in retrospect thing.
Yeah. And you know what?
From AOS
it
perspective.
does. And it would have been great if that was the story they were telling. It would have been great if that was the story they were telling. Malagor getting riled by what he could sense was the oncoming swelling of a new god coming into place. Something that would perhaps rival Sigmar himself. And he's been fighting against that for the last so many centuries. I think that would have been lovely, but that wasn't the story
it's worth noting that's specifically not how they wrote it. If they had written it that way, that actually would have been a great use of the character. But they very specifically use it as he literally just gets visions of the dark gods telling him, hey, go stop this thing. Instead of it being something that he personally deeply desires.
Yeah, and I think that would have been a great use of the character. And it's another fine example of, if we've discussed this before in our previous end time stream, and we are probably going to do another one at some point, because we just need to vent at some point. But if we sat down and we went through the entirety of the end times, I think the end times, all of it can be made to make not just sense, but be an exceedingly cool story. But what you need to do is not necessarily rewrite all the events, it's rewrite why all the events happened. Rewrite the core of what each of the characters' decisions and choices were, and get rid of all this silliness in terms of we sat here bickering. Why are you bickering? It's the end of the fucking world. Get on with it. There's things to do. And Malagor, in this particular case, clearly had potential motivation, but it wasn't put in place.
Yep. Inquisitor Thomas being real,
harsh,
being real, but Malagor died like a true Beastman, being a minor side bit.
And it's harsh but true.
Hey, at least they got to be a side bit, unlike the ogres. They didn't even get to do that.
Fair.
What's your thoughts on Malagor's Total War Warhammer start position? Oh, so this is actually something worth talking about because it's actually really interesting. I like it. I know some people don't, but what the concept behind it is, if you go back and play like Warhammer 2, when he has like dialogue about it, or Warhammer 1, I think even, is that he starts in the ruins of Morkane or Morkheim or the Marshes of Madness. And his starting speech when you play his campaign in Warhammer 1 or Warhammer 2 focuses on Malagor has gathered a large amount of war herds to a human civilization that crumbled, collapsed, and was completely overtaken and devoured by the marshes, and has become a place of utter ruin and has been despoiled. And he basically brings them all there as almost kind of a spiritual retreat, in the sense of being, this is what we will do. This is the goal. It can be done. Great civilizations of humanity have fallen before. We're going to make them fall again. And I think the idea that Malagor would be drawn to a place like Morkane to conduct a big ceremony, a big ritual, and that he would have a purpose there because of what has happened to it, I think that actually tracks pretty well for him as a character. Granted, it's pretty far away from his usual stomping grounds, but that's good. Malagor should be a character who goes all over the place in the Warhammer world, not just that little backyard in just the old world. He would be someone that, considering that he's as old as he is, and that he's known by dwarves, elves, and just man in general, he should be all over the damn place. Hell, you could even maybe argue that he knew about the ancient kingdom of Morkane, or Stragos, or whatever. It has so many fucking different names.
It does. So from my side,
yeah, is it the best?
It's a
No.
push. If you wanted to do something similar in a similar area, you could very easily have just said there was an ancient Nehekaran site of great religious importance that he knew of for reason X, Y, or Z that he's repurposing and doing some crazy ritual from, and almost doing the same. Morkane is at best, where the fuck are we going to put him? Let's make up a weak justification for Morkane.
Yeah, well, to be fair,
fine.
Yeah, it's a paragraph explanation of putting him somewhere to give you. And the important thing is to give you a different campaign experience of like, you don't want all 3 Beastmen characters starting in the Empire because that would be boring.
and also speaks to how badly the Beastmen have been treated in general. Because
it's Games Workshop's fault. See, he's just doing their
really
best.
Is. Okay? And I don't in any way blame them for doing it. But if I was to do it, I would probably have gone for somewhere that had some religious significance and having him completely devastating it. And reusing it and starting his dark rituals there, because that would have worked quite neatly. And if I was doing it with Morkane, I would have had some sort of temple that mattered being at the core of it, just to try and reinforce the characters.
Yeah, I will say it works better now, funny enough, in Warhammer 3 because you actually have the Stragos faction where they're in the city of Morkane, being all evil with the mysterious Ghoul King character who is unnamed, is just called the Ghoul King. So the fact that it's like, oh, he's going to go there and fuck up, their ancient place of worship where they used to have.
Let's run with that.
That works a lot better as opposed to Warhammer 1 where it was literally empty and he's just kind of there. But anyway, so
it's a bit weak sauce, but it's fine.
Yeah, the thing that I actually wanted to talk about, because it's something I really, really love about Malagor that I was just kind of reading over this and wanted to touch on a bit, is one of the best portrayals for Malagor in the original Beastmen book is how he's portrayed as far as when he shows up. That talks about that when Malagor is arriving to a place that he intends on. The reason he's known as the Dark Omen is because he's literally, you are forewarned by omens. And they're really creepy ones too. Like you'll find random hoof prints on your roof in the snow, or all of the milk and water that you have turns to blood, and animals that are being born are mutated. So they've got like tentacles or 2 heads or all sorts of other stuff. The crops are withering or they're growing unnaturally. So instead of, being like normal corn, it's like bizarre colors with growths and like weird, like little limbs and shit, or faces that are screaming, like just all of the most horrible nightmare shit you can imagine. And people, the thing that's so great about him is that he's so well known kind of as this potential mythological threat that when these things start to happen, even if it isn't actually Malagor, they're going to think it's Malagor.
Yeah, this is a classic example of witch signs popping up, as it's often referred to in one source or another. And if you're playing the fantasy roleplay game, you can easily simulate this by just having various miscast results pop up, or Tzeentch's curses. If you're sitting all the way back in the 2nd edition of the game, you can roll them up, and things like milk spoiling and turning to blood, or mutations suddenly arriving, or weird events occurring around you. They pop up on those tables all the time. So you can literally just manifest that stuff, make all your players freak out completely, expect there's going to be some form of witch about, and then bringing something far, far worse.
Oh, that would be such a dirty but fun play, is like your wizard miscast, and the party's like, oh, it's just one of our wizards miscasts. It's not a big deal, but it's actually way worse.
Yeah, totally.
And you, the GM, are like, haha. All right. Are you ready? I think it's time to get into questions.
There is. I just want to bring up one comment to make sure I answer on this one. I didn't mean down Nehekara. Nehekara is spread out far.
Yeah, the Marshes of Madness are way further
north of Nehekara. So I was talking basically starting them in the same place, just to make sure that was clear. Before we go, I am going to say one thing because I can't help it, because I'm here. go sign up to find out about our next game because it's freaking awesome. Dark Deeds will be coming out relatively soon.
Yeah,
I'll give you a link to it in the chat in a
check
moment.
out Dark Deeds. It's a board game, so it's not like, oh, it's a role play game where I have to get a whole bunch of shit. It's gonna be super time consuming. No, it's a board game.
And it's brought to us by the fine minds behind many of the Warhammer things that you know and love today. Good old Andy Chambers and Mark Gibbons were the people who put that together. I did indeed help write the rules this time around. So big up for me. It is absolutely gorgeous. It is absolutely lovely. You should go take a look. And indeed, we even have I got this around? I don't. I'm going to quickly ping up a website because believe it or not, the Rookery even has its own website now.
Woo!
Yeah, we have a website. We're like grown-ups. If you want to go check out our route, it's rookerypublications.com. And you can go find out all the crazy stuff that we're doing, including particularly relevant for us here on Lorebeards. We do a lot of videos over in the Rookery for YouTube. And they're often discussing not necessarily things that are the same, but they're certainly related, not necessarily always lore. But as we've already discussed, sometimes it's about how to role play, it's about how to build your own games,
a lot
how to
of
write
good
your own
workshopping
games.
information.
Yeah, loads of stuff in there. And if any of that interests you, you can scroll back for about 110 different videos that are currently over there just now about pretty much every subject about gaming. We've even had on, for example, from Total War, when Total War 3 came out, we did a stream on the night of release with good old Andy. He popped over. That was lovely. Andy, he popped in. And we did a stream with him on the night where we were discussing everything new that was coming to the game. So we've got a nice variety of stuff in there. Do pop over. But Dark Deeds is awesome. Go check it out. I will find a link while the questions are picked up.
Yes, and Andy is totally going to find a way to do a playthrough of the game and put it on a YouTube channel so people can go, what is this?
It's going to be so much fun. I can't tell you how much fun the game is. Because basically you're playing minions where you backstab each other and everyone else like crazy. In the service of a big patron. It's loads of fun.
Right.
I'm going. I brought up the wrong quotation. Never mind. I'll get
questions that we need to answer here from the Discord. Thank you to those of you who submitted a question beforehand. So some of these we've already answered, such as like, why did Malagor not wait for Morgur? And although we don't get an explicit reason, I think that the evidence is very heavily in that he can't control Morgur. And if Morgur's around, I think Morgur's an interesting thing for Malagor. Malagor is the advisor who speaks with the voice of the gods, whereas Morgur is more like God. So if Morgur's saying, we're going to do this, follow me, the Beastmen are going to follow him, not Malagor. So his voice, his power is significantly lessened, which for how, frankly, strategic and tactical Malagor is, would really not jive with him. I think he would find that to be a huge issue.
Absolutely agreed.
Oh, damn it. Off-topic question. Why is the word hell in Warhammer? So, yeah, that's kind of one of those things where, like, when you're playing, watching any kind of fantasy show or playing a fantasy system, you'll see words that in our world tie back to very specific things like Christianity or some kind of religion that obviously does not exist in that fantasy world. And I think this kind of, the way I always rationalize it is I kind of think of it under the terms of like the Tolkienism of like Tolkien. Tolkien says something when you're reading like Lord of the Rings and stuff where he's like, oh, I didn't write this. I found an ancient tome written by a hobbit and I've translated it into English and I've kind of like put in words that give you the approximation of what it means.
Yeah, no. I'm going a completely different direction.
Oh,
the hells are a concept inside the Warhammer world that pops up again and again and again.
That's true.
Cain, the god of murder, has his own hell, effectively, which is considered to be a place that if you are to go there will be the freaking worst, which will happen if you are killed by a follower of Cain. Similarly, the chaos gods sometimes have their realms referred to as the hells as a way of referring to them without actually saying the word chaos or mentioning any of the dark gods or doing anything else. So the word hells is used in a variety of different cultures to represent anywhere that is awful in the general afterlives or the realm of chaos, if you wish, or the aether or anything similar. If you want to look at it as the realms of chaos, it's all the realms that fucking suck. So basically, hells do exist, and things like Hellspite, Hellfire, whatever, all the various hell stuff ties through to a variety of different linguistic backgrounds where hell just has a different meaning to how we often use it in the real world, often when it's spelled H-E-L. So not only is it justified within the world, linguistically it can be as well. So in this instance, I will quite happily say it's fine.
Yeah, also, for just a funsies fact, if you want to see an example of a hell and how like fucking awful it is, go read Gotrek and Felix Giant Slayer, because there is a scene where one of the characters ends up in a hell for a brief bit, and it sucks.
Yeah, not good at all. Hey, Ryan.
Sotek, do you think the Beastmen need a TLC? I assume that means
Tender loving care?
Yes, they do. Update concerning their textures and lore spell effects. This question could apply to all the races of Total War Warhammer, maybe Total Warhammer 2 as well. Yes, I would love to see Beastmen get some texture updates and for the Lore of the Wild to get a refresh. They've been doing that. Like, they've been going through all of the Warhammer 1 lores of magic and been updating their effects to make them better. And so I hope the Lore of the Wild will be on that list, because I think that would be super good, because it's pretty boring lore right now, which is granted. Warhammer 1 was very constrained, and Beastmen were one of the first DLCs, so they were also very heavily constrained. Also, please give me more Beastmen monsters. Like, give me my Praeton, please, 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 please. The one guy, a campaign set in an isolated monastery or other holy site and being hunted by Malagor would be awesome. It would make for a kick-ass horror campaign.
Yeah, Malagor is a great character. If you actually look at Malagor's stats in terms of their Warhammer stats, they're not that good. He is not the biggest, most kick-assest of characters. What he is a very powerful sorcerer.
He's a scary strong wizard.
Yeah. And he's a sorcerer. The more that he casts, the slightly better that he gets as he goes along as well, meaning that once he gets going, he can be horrific. As a character to represent basically the iconoclastic breaking down of religious artifacts, absolutely, and a character I'd very much like to see used. Now, for all I say that in Warhammer stats he's not that good, in comparison to your average PC, if you were playing Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, he'd have them all for breakfast, and that as well is an interesting thing to try and play upon. But the way you play upon it as a GM is not to use him as a direct antagonist. You don't want him pitched against the PCs that much. You want his influence to be felt. You want the horror of what lies beyond coming in, as he is ultimately an advisor, not someone who deals with it himself as much. So having them come in, capture, and then come in afterwards, once everyone is secured, and then talk it out like the horror show that he is. There is some beautiful role-playing situations you can have there. So ultimately, I agree completely.
Yeah, having characters like trying to resist and ultimately fail, and then they get to see what Malagor does to a place. Because like, as long as they're not, the priests or whatever, he doesn't give a shit about them. Like, he doesn't care, so they could very easily get away.
I'd kill him.
Yeah, obviously you can kill the characters, but
that's what you got fate points for.
Yeah, that's true.
I would seriously screw with their
if I was making a character and you wanted them to have like a fuck up backstory that they keep secret to themselves for a long time, having a character that survived a Malagor incident, like maybe they were like an urchin that lived in a temple or was taken care of by a temple, and they hid somewhere and were able to survive, but they witnessed what Malagor does. That'd be fucking awesome for a character backstory, and they would have so much trauma.
So true, so true.
Agree. Actually, no. The last question from Infiltrator of Troy: how Malagor get his wings? He was born with them. How old is he? We don't know for sure, but probably thousands of years old. What goes into making a herd stone? Ooh, that's a great question. That is actually kind of hard to answer because
there's a lot here. Yeah, there is a lot here. Loosely speaking, it is a place of extraordinary importance to the Beastmen, and the reason for that can fluctuate. It could be a center of previous religious thought. It could be magical. It could be just a site where things happened and a great stone was raised. It could be where a previous champion was elevated to become a demon prince, and great stones have been raised to celebrate this. What it is, in general, is a place that's dedicated to the dark gods, is very possibly attached to and is a part of the geomantic web, because they'll have tapped onto the existing stones, or alternatively, the old elven way stones that, of course, pepper their way across the old world, being repurposed because they're dragging magic to them to be a herd stone. To cut this big story short, it's any site of religious or magical importance that's deep in the trees that the Beastmen can get their hands on. And there could be a variety of tales behind exactly why it will be a Hearthstone.
Yeah, and they are very, very, very heavily defended. They're often beastmen that permanently live around them, and they are magical as fuck. But yeah, they're made all sorts of weird stuff. Sometimes they're made of regular stone. Sometimes it's a warpstone meteor that has been carved up. There's a lot of crazy stuff. Sean Saltz, is Malagor the Bond villain sitting in the shadowy chair petting a cat?
I'd say he's worse. Much worse, because he is not going to sit there and explain his plan. What he's going to do is tear down everything you believe in a fashion that makes you go, he's right. Oh my god, this thing is right. And then once he has won, he kills everything, because he has made the necessary despair spread.
Could you imagine the like Malagor could give such an amazing speech if you used him as an antagonist for a Sigmarite, especially, of Malagor being like, yeah, I met your god. He's not at all what you think he is. And like, ooh, he could hold that over them to such a horrifying degree of, I know your god. I saw him.
So true. Yeah, that'd be a super fun story.
Yep. Let's see. What was Malagor's most famous magical duel? Unfortunately, that kind of falls under...
Seriously, write more about Malagor.
Yeah, we don't really know. He does get a couple of big moments in the end times where when he is not batshit crazy, he kind of dominates all of his little fights. Like even when he goes up against Gregor Martark, the Supreme Patriarch of the Beast Order, Malagor is like full on holding his own. And is kind of unstoppable until he basically... The way they played is that Malagor he's so cautious and careful about where he positions himself. Nobody can really deal with him. And then he frenzies and he charges in and he dies immediately. So
such a waste.
Yeah, but I will say, like Andy was saying, he literally has very explicit built-in rules. Malagor is the most powerful Bray Shaman that exists, where he literally, as he channels more magic and he unleashes more spells, he gets stronger. He gets stronger and strong. His spells get more and more powerful as he kind of starts becoming like a funnel to the winds of magic, which is a fucking terrifying ability. Like, that is a bizarre and nightmarish power that the more they use magic, the more of it, the stronger they get. That is incredibly unusual and nasty. And plus, his lore selection is nightmarish.
It's wide. It's pretty
and decent. That he can use shadows, death, wilds. Like, he has access to some gnarly fucking spells. So in magical duels, he would be pretty fucking awful for most people to deal with. Like, even experienced wizards would struggle with Malagor.
Yep. Malagor's pretty damn powerful. He's not peak Warhammer, as in there are other characters that are more powerful than him at their base value, but by the gods, he's good when it comes to magic. Very good.
If you're not a named character, you do not want to deal with that. you want to have at least a name to yourself.
Yeah.
But let's see. Is there any particular non-chaos deity Malagor hates the most and wishes to eradicate all the temples from the world? Sigmar.
Probably Sigmar, yeah.
Yeah, he seems to have a particular ire towards Sigmar.
It's certainly something that could easily be rewritten if they wish to do so, particularly if they're wanting to focus on the Wood Elves. They could easily turn that into something else for the story that they're doing for the old world. But as it currently stands, Sigmar stands head and shoulders above the rest.
Yep. Since he's the Crow Father and carrion birds follow him, what's his relationship with Nurgle and Nurgle's followers? I think, like we said kind of with Tzeentch earlier, it's not an explicitly unique relationship, but he would appeal to all the dark powers for various reasons. Even Khorne. Like, it's easy to write off, oh, he's just a wizard, so Khorne would hate him. No, he's an advisor. He is he speaks with the voice of the gods, which even the Khornates want to hear. They want to know Khorne's will. Khorne, as much as Khorne like smacks of like, oh, magic is terrible, he is an entity of magic. He relies upon it. His demons are made of it. They need magic to manifest, which, is kind of the really good, in my opinion, irony of Khorne, that he's kind of what's the word? He's a hypocrite. In some senses, depending on how you look at it. Though the way he hates magic is actually more particular than a lot of people realize. It's more that he hates magic being used for bloodshed in particular.
It's about how magic is used. He's against magic getting in the way. Yeah.
And the thing about Malagor is Malagor knows. Like I would say Malagor, when it comes to chaos characters, Malagor is probably one of the slipperiest, most gifted, cunning diplomats that chaos has to offer.
Yeah, it's something that you don't normally associate with Beastmen. And that's one of the reasons why I was a little bit disappointed with his end. And it's also one of the reasons why I'm disappointed we don't have more detail about Malagor, because if we did, we'd have had an opportunity to see Beastmen in a different light. Because quite clearly, he's a character of extreme gifts, but those gifts never really get an opportunity to shine.
Yep. Let's see. Since he's the Crow Father, how do you and Andy think Malagor would feel about the Moon Empress, since she has her own Onyx Crowmen? Could she be a character that could genuinely scare him? I don't think she would scare him per se. Malagor does not seem like the scareable type in a sense.
Oh, no, I imagine, his leadership's only 8. In the greater scheme of things, he's going to flee at points as well. I'd go for more. Sure, he's going to get there's going to be things that he's going to cautiously remove himself from, because who would want to deal with a big fuck off moon dragon? That would be very foolish. But I think the relationship with being the Crow Father, it's just a name. He gets big, huge carrion birds come along with him, but it's ultimately a name. It's not something that particularly defines him. And if he sees anything else with crows, he goes, wait a minute, they're mine. Yeah, now it's not really like that.
A better question to answer your question would be, what could Malagor do to the Onyx Crowmen to pervert them, to despoil them, and turn them into something worse?
Now we're talking.
Now we're cooking.
Yeah, now we're cooking. Now we're trying to build an interesting story. We're trying to use Malagor at his strengths against something that might not naturally be perceived to be an enemy. And I quite like that. Yeah, there's definitely something in that.
Because that's the thing. That's the important thing about Malagor. A lot of people get too caught up on the Crowfather aspect. It's the despoiler. That is his gimmick. Let's see. What's the holiest temple Malagor has ever desecrated? Oh gosh, I'd have to. There is a very brief mention. I don't remember what page it's on, so it's going to take me too long to look it up. The Beastmen book is organized kind of weird because there's no timeline in it, which sucks.
That says something about how they handle their history, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's no timeline in that book, which is a huge bummer. It's one of the only army books that doesn't have a timeline.
Yeah,
actually, I think it is the only army book that doesn't have a timeline, because the Bretonnian one does, and the Skaven one does too. Yeah, but there is a little mention somewhere in the book of him screwing up a couple of specific temples. That being said, they're kind of like not places you would really know, because obviously if Malagor screws up a place, it's probably no longer on the map. So they can't really use a place they want to keep. They have to use somewhere else. That being said, pretty much anything out in the wilds is fair game. It would have been really cool to use it. You know what would have been the best place to use Malagor? Would have been Malagor desecrating the Cathedral of Sigmar in Altdorf during the fall of Altdorf. Because the whole thing,
lovely.
Because he could have pulled that off, and it wouldn't have changed anything about how that battle ends up going down. Where, yeah, sure, he still flees
100%,
but he gets that moral victory of he does still desecrate the temple.
And then someone else can claim revenge for said desecration as you move towards the end. That means we get ourselves that would have been lovely resolution. Yeah,
you get the rematch with him in Middenheim,
and then he dies rematch, and then he dies. So perfect.
That would have been great.
Damn it. Yeah, that would have been great.
Okay. Here's kind of a fun question. Since we know that Kislevite magic, for instance, comes from the land itself, how would the Beastmen, or Malagor in particular, go about desecrating? Would they even be able to? Would they be able to? Yes, absolutely.
I'd say you're actually conflating two things here which shouldn't be conflated. One is religion and the other one is magic. They are two
That's true.
very different things. In Kislev, you've got various gods. You've got Urson, you've got Tyre, you've got other gods. Let's just not bother going into all of that, all of which have got their own extremely important religious sites. There's also some cross-pollination here. The great teeth of Urson, for example, which sit in the middle of the oblast. And an important site not just for Urson worship, the bear, but also for ice magic in general, because it's a focal point from that and was used, I believe, in the Ambassador Chronicle novels, okay, as a location. There is somewhere that he could 100% desecrate and really go to town on and affect both the ice magic of Kislev itself and the power of the land and also the religious side of things. So I think the answer to that is yes, it can be done. But don't conflate religion with magic. They're two different things.
Yeah.
Normally, depending on which faction you're dealing with.
It would be an interesting tale, though. I think you could tell a fun story of an ice witch trying to deal with Malagor and how her ice magic is warped by what he's been doing to the land. Like, she still has ice magic, but it would
Super
be different. Hammond, what would Malagor think about Sotek from his perspective, being born from nothing? Lizard Moses essentially eradicated creatures of chaos with a new upstart god. Would he hate him more than Sigmar? I don't think he would hate him more than Sigmar. No, because Sotek represents different things. And there are specific elements of what Sigmar represents that I think stokes Malagor's ire particularly. Sotek, while being an enemy of chaos, is still kind of like a wild god, like a god that does not usher civilization, so to speak. It's more of an enemy. It's not an entity of creation. It's an entity of destruction, if that makes sense. Sigmar is kind of an entity, he's supposed to be, kind of an entity of creation, and I think that's what pisses off Malagor so much.
Yeah. Loosely speaking, he doesn't just he's not born from nothing. Sotek is arguably much older than that alone. Lizard Moses did indeed do an awful lot, but I think that there would be a great deal of confusion from Malagor as he arrives at, say, for example, Lustria, and finds this great wealth of religion mixed with magic. It would be confusing and different and would almost certainly intrigue. But as to opinions, you're almost requiring a God view to understand all of this. So much of it would be lost to time. So there'd be very little to actually attach your teeth into beyond let's take down these giant temple cities. That, I think, would be core.
Yeah, he'd be all for that.
It'd be all ultimately about bring down the temple cities, desecrate them, massacre the priests that sit across the top and kill them with their own. I think Malagor, in fact, would make a marvelous character to go to town on the Lizardmen because they have religion at their core and Malagor has bringing down religion at his core. So there's a really nice tension that sits between them. And imagine the horrific scene of a Slam mage priest being effectively murdered at the top by Malagor. That'd be an amazing scene. A truly horrific one, an ancient entity from times long gone by being killed by this upstart. It'd be good. And
man, have them destroy like a Southlands city. I'd be super down for that. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. There's definitely a lot that could be done with that.
Yep. Let's see. Hypothetically, how much rivalry would Malagor and Mother Ostankia have? They wouldn't like each other, but I don't think they'd have a particularly notable rivalry.
Doesn't feel like it's the source of a giant rivalry. They're gonna kill each
once again,
other.
Mother Ostankia is not really a religious figure. Like she represents like a lot of the old faith of Kislev, but it's once again it's different. And once again, she is part of the natural wilds as opposed to like, oh, bring civilization, because you have to remember it's encroaching on Beastmen territory by bringing civilization that is really going to piss off Malagor the most.
Yeah, there's characters that are most certainly more likely to have rivalries than them.
Let's see. Since his main thing is hatred and destruction of the gods, how would Malagor go about despoiling and wounding someone like the Celestial Dragon Emperor? That would be an interesting thing. Yeah, an interesting thing to point Malagor at would be the Great Bastion, for instance. Considering that the Great Bastion does have a lot of magic and frankly faith, even though the Dragon Emperor would not like anyone saying that, put into it, that is something Malagor would be like, that I want to destroy that more than anything.
Yeah, I could see that being the case.
So
And I could see,
that would fuck up the Celestial Dragon Emperor, because he's literally poured his own essence into the Great Bastion.
yeah, I think that'd be a super fun story.
Yeah, so that would probably be that particular showdown. Sotek is born of Goros and Lord Krimlo. That is extremely rude to both of my parents. How fucking dare you? Let's see. Do we know if... Oh, this is such a great question. The answer is no, but it's a great question. Do we know if Malagor has a complex theory about religion and the gods? Does he have a theory which he uses as justification for despoiling their holy sites? Just how intellectual of a Bray shaman is he?
I think the answer to that is yes, 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 all the way yes, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So if you're building one for your own game, you would need to sit down and figure it out for yourself. But do I think he is an intellectual character? I think that would make for a far better version of Malagor than the alternative. We already have crazy wild idiots. We already have all manner of stupid Beastmen characters that have very little in the way of actual intellect or intelligence. This would be a lovely way to distance not just Malagor from the rest of them, but from distance Beastmen from the base stereotypes that are often used for them, and to start adding something more to them. So my preference would be absolutely dial down into that, but we don't actually know the answer for it. That's more of a personal preference.
Yep. And the last thing he's talked about here is Malagor versus Nagash and all that stuff. Would Malagor consider Nagash a human deity, since before his transformation he was human? I don't think he would consider Nagash a god, because Nagash just isn't, to be frank. And Malagor is one of those characters who would probably have a very good understanding of what is and isn't a god. That being said, if he came across a site, if he came across like Nagashazar, which is very much built around worship of Nagash, yeah, he'd probably be like, all right, this needs to go.
Yeah, I broadly agree. Nagash is not a god. No matter what eventually it becomes, Nagash just isn't. Nagash is akin to them and getting very close, but I think it's fair to say that Ascension is a core Nagash, let's say, drive. So moving towards becoming a god, absolutely. And would Morgor have issues with that? Yeah, very probably. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they would be more important than the far more pressing issues that already exist. Trying to single out individuals in this fashion is very much something that we can easily do with, again, our God view. But down on the ground, there's just more pressing issues lying across the horizon. It's the sort of thing that would pretty much never come to pass unless it was forced out of a narrative because it had to happen.
Yeah, Malagor, and you have to remember that Malagor is kind of this grand, like, orchestrator of trying to get just so many different warherds to be on the same pages. It's incredibly rare he would ever be running into like other named characters or interacting with them in any way, because that's just not the role he tends to play.
Yeah, he's got too much to do.
Yeah, he's got shit to do. He ain't got time to throw down with people. He's busy. He's got a job.
Absolutely.
Still loading. Can't tell me there's no more of Beast God. It feels implied to have a top dog more than any lore. Would Malagor venerate or seek to co-op power? I'm trying to decipher this. Still loading. I don't know if you're able to...
So if you can drop some clarification for this post, that'd be greatly useful, because I'm not quite sure what you're saying. You can't tell me there is no more of beast gods, so a beastman god. It feels implied to have a top dog more than any other lore. Would Malagor venerate or seek to co-opt the power of a god of beasts? I think that's what you're saying. I think you're saying that basically there would be some sort of beast god, and if there was such a thing, then Malagor would definitely go for that. And I think that the answer is no, they wouldn't, if that's what you're saying, but I'm not quite sure I've caught exactly what you're offering there. God of the lore of beasts. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, Malagor, he would seek to despoil it. Because that is his way of asserting control over life. That is his way of influencing matters, and he would continue to do that.
Yeah, I could make an argument on the other side because, I like to try and pitch a different one. I think I could, but as it stands, Malagor's raison d'etre is super clear. And regardless of what you may or may not be a god of, that's a little bit like saying that I don't want to take down Tal because it has something to do with beasts, and he most certainly would want to take down the sacred sites of Tal. So I think the ultimate answer is there. Yeah, he'd take it down.
Yep. Malagor versus Myrmidia cage match win. Malagor would be
grossly dead.
Yeah. It's like best case scenario, like the mortal incarnation of Myrmidia, but like, yeah, Malagor is
that'd be fun. Actually, I reckon you could make a good. You could possibly make a good one for mortals, but ultimately, I think Malagor is possibly going to be on the receiving end of a butt kicking.
Yeah. Malagor is not the god killer. Morgur is the god killer. Malagor would be very out of his element. He's just a wizard, guys. Give him a break. Spell, God goes smite. Get the fuck out of here. Ryan Adwell,
you missed the last one. I just
sorry. I would love a story between Beastmen and Chorfs. Yeah, it'd be great. It's
agreed.
Barely ever brought up at all, but they would fucking hate each other. It'd be great.
Yeah. And I think it would be a really good story and one that is currently missed.
Yeah, especially like, hell, give me Tarux fighting against the Chaos Dwarfs, and the Chaos Dwarfs being like, well, that's kind of a fucking weird dude over there. And the Minotaurs being like, those are some weird looking Minotaurish things over there. Let them duke it out. Be great.
Yeah, quite. Hey, Ryan.
You both mentioned the Beastmen take expansionism as a personal assault by man concerning their holy sites. Do you think Malagor does the same as a form of spider, eye for an eye to humanity? I think that is a very strong argument.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that there's he is one for absolute eradication of things. So I could see towns being taken out by him and those who have been influenced by him to effectively reclaim them. So many of the ancient ruins that dot the empire could very well be the result of Malagor's, let's say, passing. To be nice.
Yep. Morning, lads from Australia. When can we expect new Lorebeards art / Lawhammering logo added next to the beautiful Sotek one? Yeah, when are we getting a?
Yeah, we've actually had a bit of a discussion over on the Lawhammer side about this because we currently don't have an actual logo at the moment. We've just got a silly little small bit vicious dog sitting on anything that we've done. We don't have a logo at all. This is entirely down to me because everyone I've drawn, I kind of hate. So I'm sure I'll get one eventually, but as it currently stands, I don't have one. It will come in time. Let's see if I can get one done for our big, huge, mighty fight on Monday.
That would be impressive. You've got one.
It ain't happening.
No. All right.
Thanks very much for the question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Infiltrator Troy, what relationship does Malagor have with the Chaos Gods, including the ones smaller than the Big Four? That would be an interesting question of what his view would be on gods beneath just the big pantheon. Obviously, he venerates the entire big pantheon, but he would probably... honestly, I don't think there's an easy answer for that. That would be an interesting question to pose to Malagor.
Yeah, I think the interesting question here has yet to be posed. And I think that's why this is a particularly difficult one to answer. And that is, we now have with the old world a clear pantheon of chaos deities with 4 of them sitting at the top. And now Malagor can fit in anywhere there. For example, they may have some sort of beast lord who is all about taking down other gods, and Malagor is just his representative. Suddenly, everything changes. Malagor is a new character with a new reason for existing. So I think the answer to this is going to come with time, and possibly will never come, because it's also possible that the old world's mention of an entire pantheon of gods is literally just a castaway line that they never return to again, because that happens with Warhammer writers. Sometimes they write a thing and no one follows it up, and we're left going, but everything you said before contradicts this new thing. Tell me more. And they don't provide more because it isn't the thing that they wrote or they're aware of because they missed it when they did their read through of a book. So there's definitely something.
We have a very unbiased recommendation.
The logo should be Alamena Wife. She is the main character of Warhammer. Yeah, nice try.
Put Alemenowith and Carillion in a room together. Only one leaves alive. Only one.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah, that's definitely a thing, Lindsay.
Yeah. I got you, Andy. Check DMs.
Andy's come in.
Oh shit! Oh, they're fighting in the chat.
There's a fight in the chat from Andy Lease. Clearly, the logo should be Leopold's flaming hammer.
That feels like a euphemism. Hawk of the Night.
He's just so hot.
Yeah. As someone who hasn't played Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, do you think Malagor would be a suitable big bad for a campaign? Yes.
Yes.
Pretty much any named character would make good, but Malagor would be a particularly good one, especially if you're having to like follow his line of desecration from different kinds of temples. Yeah, awesome.
I'm just going to pull up this so you know, Yaka, that Alamenowith is one of the characters in Lawhammer, the actual play that I stream every single Friday with the best players in the world. And we have an absolute laugh. If you want to know more about that, go check over on the Lawhammer channels. We have over 50 episodes of that campaign so far. And if you want to know more about Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay,
and you haven't gone and watched Lawhammer, that's going to be a requirement for mods, is to watch Lawhammer. Otherwise you'll be fired.
Glad you brought that up, so I didn't need to.
Good God. Standards here shrinking. I think Malagor's relation with gods in general depends on how that god influences their followers in relation to the forest and their inhabitants. Maybe
I think because
it kind of starts to fall apart when you deal with like Tall.
Yeah, and I don't think it does actually, because it's too easy to immediately go, certain gods are gods of this and other gods clearly aren't that. No, they are all gods of human civilization. Even Tal is a representation of civilization and the interactions that they have with the forest and the wild. So every single last one of those motherfuckers can be brought down. Malagor does not discriminate. He is an equal opportunity iconoclast. He will destroy them all. Bring him down.
He'll give you rights and lefts.
Totally. He's fine.
How would Malagor fare if he were set loose upon Ulthuan, both with and without a Brayheart? But without a Brayheart, he would die fairly quickly. Like once again, he is a influencer type character. He is an fucking YouTuber.
Wow.
He is a manipulator, a puppeteer. Like that's a very key part of him. By himself, is he dangerous? Yes, absolutely. But Ulthuan is one of the best geared places to deal with him, because they've got a lot of really powerful wizards. And
super powerful wizards.
He would
basically
be by himself.
All the top tier wizards of Ulthuan are basically like named characters. You could just keep on adding and adding as we go through the various lore masters at the Tower of Safri. And it would be, quite frankly, not a good day for Malagor. He would not fare well. Now, if this was a place that was full of beastmen already, then Malagor could start a campaign. This is very different to Athel Loren. Athel Loren already has significant beastmen populations both in it and around it, meaning that Malagor can make a significant impact upon the conflicts there. But over in Ulthuan, it's pretty much beastman free, which means poor old Malagor is a corpse.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to blast through the last couple of these because we're kind of out of time. Is there anything I would change about Malagor in Total War to better reflect his lore? Honestly, I think he's in a pretty good place now. I think he's fine. A lot of Beastmen characters often vague where exactly they come from and which part of the worlds they are active. Yeah. Unfortunately, that is just the situation we're dealt. Yeah, there's no easy answers for you as far as like where Malagor's been, where he was born, or any of that. We have no idea.
Yeah.
Given that this whole thing is desecration, toppling gods, how would Malagor view the Chaos Dwarf Empire and Grand Cathay? We already talked about he would hate the Chaos Dwarves. Grand Cathay, he probably would not like Grand Cathay very much, especially Harmony as like a concept would be kind of like ugh to the beast.
Yeah, he's just got different icons to smash. I think that he most certainly would be a smasher of what Cathay represents.
Yep. Looking at the map, Beastmen distributed around the world. Size of Beastmen populations in Nippon, Araby, and the Southlands are quite different to other human nations. Do you think that Malagor having such a sway over the entire Beastmen race could change how GW eventually writes their version of these nations? Would be nice to see.
Yeah, it really would be nice to see.
GW, because I doubt it, but it'd be nice to see.
Beastmen are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're a little bit like greenskins. You pretty much get them throughout the known Warhammer world. So I think it would be almost incumbent upon whichever writers are responsible for building these individual factions, let's say, for them to ensure that at least one or two events from their history are dealing with Beastmen and how they represent themselves culturally within that environment.
How close do you think Malagor has ever come to finding Ladriel / Lady of the Lake? Probably not close at all. That's more Morgar's thing, not Malagor's.
Really, no. That
once again, Malagor is not a god killer. That is not his shtick.
No. Yeah, no. That would be again pitching the wrong sort of character against the wrong sort of character. If you really want to get Malagor against someone that you feel he'd be going against, you're looking at your grand theogonists. You're looking at representations of religion, and that's who you should be going about. Yeah, that sort of thing is super fun.
Like that. Zara. Thank you for the super chat. Painting with you guys talking is very productive. Appreciate it, guys. I wish I could paint while listening to things. I am bad at that.
You know what? Maybe that's what I should start doing when we're doing our chat, so I actually get some painting bloody done. Because it was. No, but sadly, I'm also looking at comments.
Malagor versus the Kingdoms of End. That seems like grand prize for the Despoiler of Sacred. The Land of 1,000 Gods. He'd probably have a lot of fun.
That is one that if I was writing it, I would put Malagor down there purposefully. I would move him because there's some great stories you could tell there. And then you could shift him back up again.
Oh, that actually, okay. I'll amend my earlier statement for Total War. I would like to see Malagor move further east. I think he would actually make for an exceptional character going way, way, way east and leading like the Beastmen of Cathay, or if we could end eventually putting him there, I think that would work great for him.
Certainly better than Murkane.
Yeah, he's just sort of there. I mean, which
he's there.
Let's see. Would Malagor could Malagor successfully lead a human-centered chaos warband?
I mean, the question is, would he lead? And that is ultimately what we're looking at here. He is not naturally a leader, although Total War will give you a different impression because that's what Total War is all about. Yeah. But broadly speaking, in terms of his character, he is someone who joins, manipulates, and moves others around. So would he do this to non-humans? I mean, non-beastmen is the next one. And I think the answer is that's not what he does. He's not really interested in that. He's not interested in chaos matters. He's interested in beastman matters. To do that, while sure you could write a story where he did do that, but it weakens him in terms of his overall story and the one that's being told, which is a beastman story. If you start attaching him to the other chaos factions, so to speak, all you're doing is effectively making the beastmen seem, if anything, less important.
And the stories that
you are absolutely diluting it. So loosely, I would prefer not to dilute those stories. For all, it is a really easy and fun choice to do, and you certainly could do it for an individual story. It would be better to concentrate rather than dilute in this instance.
I sent you something on Discord that Hammond just sent to me, just so you can laugh at it.
Oh, I've just been sent something as well.
So, for anyone curious, I think it was his pitch for the Lawhammer logo, which is Mimir's head from God of War Ragnarok.
With Lawhammer written around it.
Yeah, just. Anywho. All right. So
nice one, Hammond.
Yeah, all the other questions I feel like we've answered appropriately. As the last one being, is there a character Malagor is particularly inclined to work with? I would say probably not really. The only one that he works with explicitly in a story is Goros Warhoof, where he convinces him to participate in the Battle of Athol Loren. So, there is that where but I think any character that leads a herd is a character that he is likely to interact with.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was going to say. You're really looking for any character that's got a big war herd, bray herd, or whatever else you want to call it. A big chunk of beastmen that could be easily influenced towards Malagor's ends. And they definitely will be used.
Yeah, another cool story that I would like to see them do if they ever wanted to would be that if Malagor tried to convince Kazrak the One-Eye to do something. Because I think Kazrak would be a very interesting character in that his personal vendetta with the Toddbringer is so much more important to him than anything else that he would probably deny Malagor, which would lead to some really interesting conflict.
Yeah. I think that's quite a good line on that one in particular.
All right, and with that, we're done.
So we're at the end. Do remember the following things. Number one, tomorrow, Malekith is going to massacre Settra. Now, if you might not have realized this yet, but it is the outcome we're going to have.
Yeah. That's what his mommy
Alternatively,
tells him
who
every day.
will win? Malekith or Cetra. Tomorrow we will be deciding that at 12 a.m. UK time, which is partly 6 p.m. if you're in the middle of America. Oh, you're so lucky over there, Americans.
It's already up on the YouTube channel, so you could just go do the notify me button. From Andy's perspective, it is tomorrow. From
totally.
From an American perspective, it's in 2 days.
Yeah, quite. From my perspective, this is 100% tomorrow. I'm going to get one sleep before this occurs. So I'm going to have a good think as to exactly how Malekith is going to Malarian his way across Cetra and his pathetic empire that should just be called the Hex Empire. Anyway, beyond that, might I also say, if you have enjoyed the stream and you want to say thanks to me, do pop over to the Dark Deeds website and sign up for more news about Dark Deeds. Even if you're not sure whether you want to play it or not, or if it's really your thing, just go sign up anyway. You'll get some news as to whether the game is your thing or not, popping into your email address. This has nothing to do with me personally. It's Modiphius that are running this. This is another games company who are publishing for us. But do pop over there, sign up. It would be enormously appreciated. The link is currently sitting inside the chat. Yeah. I've done the grown-up thing. Also, subscribe!
Yes, and for the love of God, please go subscribe to Lawhammer. We're so close to Quick Head Taker.
Oh, yeah, Quick Head Taker's at 5K, and we must only be about 200 folk or so away from that.
We're getting real close.
Bluntly speaking, if everybody who watches this right now just pops over to the Lawhammer channel, presses subscribe, we will have Queek by pretty much needed by the end of this week. I put the pressure on, so take that.
Don't do that to me.
Panic!
Yeah, and I will say, for anyone that's like worried about the Malekith versus Cetra stream, just make sure you do the notify me button. I'll make sure me and Andy are 100% after we get offline. On when that's going to be, because when it goes live, you'll get an alert and then you're good to go. But I will send out alerts about
it's already
this many hours from now.
Yeah, it's already posted up over on Sotek's channel, so you can go look at it right now and how long it is before it goes live.
Yep. All right. And that's it for us today. So thank you all so much for watching.
Oh, you rock. It's been a good day. I enjoyed that one.
Yep. And we will see y'all in pretty soon.
In another day. Pretty soon.
If you'd like to show up to the next thing, we'll see you soon. And if not, we'll see you in a week. Remember that next Lorebeards is on Andy's channel over there.
Oh, it certainly is.
And we're going to be talking about the new Shadows of Change stuff. Will I do the quick lore video on Skaven cosplay? So you're not going to see anybody is the thing, but there will be an Andy Skaven at the end. So it's better than cosplay.
I love doing Skaven. Anyone who's watched Lawhammer will know just how much I enjoy doing Skaven. I can sometimes be a bit noisy. I do enjoy it.
Andy will be in the video. That was part of the dark deal that was forged.
Our dark deal in the background.
See you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.
See y'all later. Bye-bye.